Welcome to the channel Stories to Relax. I'm Bento, and here we take things gently, letting the mind slow down as we dive into fascinating stories told at just the right pace to help you relax, or maybe even drift off to sleep. If you prefer a softer narration, try setting the playback speed to 0.8. The wooden litter swayed with each step of the bearers. Ivar observed the battlefield from above, his body motionless, his eyes sharp as broken glass. Northern England, year 865. The Christian armies waited below, shields locked, prayers whispered. They had heard the stories. They did not believe them. How does a man who cannot walk lead an army? How does a body without strength command warriors bred for violence? The English soldiers saw the litter approaching and felt something worse than fear, confusion mixed with dread. Ivar's hands rested on the edges of his seat, fingers that could not lift a sword, legs that had never carried his weight, a spine that bent under its own fragility. Yet thousands of Vikings followed him across the sea. Thousands more would follow him into fire. The great heathen army stretched across the horizon like a living scar, and at its center, carried like a god, rode the son of Ragnar Lodbrok, the man they called Boneless. His brothers could swing axes. Ivar could break mines. And on that cold English morning, the Christians were about to learn which weapon cut deeper. To understand why Ivar sat in that litter commanding thousands, you need to go back 30 years, to the moment when a child was born who should not have survived the night. Scandinavia in the year 835 was a world of iron and ice. Strength was currency, weakness was death. When Aslaug the queen gave birth to Ragnar Lodbrok's son, the midwives saw the twisted legs and knew the truth immediately. The child's bones were soft, fragile, wrong. In most Viking families, a baby born like this would be left in the forest. A mercy, they called it, the gods rejecting what they did not want. But Ragnar did not leave his son to die, perhaps because Aslaug claimed the boy was touched by the gods, marked for a different kind of greatness. Perhaps because Ragnar saw something in those fierce blue eyes, a hunger that had nothing to do with the body. Whatever the reason, Ivar lived. He grew up in the shadow of perfection. His brothers, Bjorn, Ubbe, Hvitserk, Sigurd, were everything Vikings admired. Tall, strong, skilled with weapons, comfortable in their own skin. They trained in the yards, wrestled in the mud, earned scars and respect. Ivar watched from the sidelines, dragging himself across the ground like a broken thing. The other children mocked him. Even his own brothers, in the careless cruelty of youth, made him feel less than human. Boneless, they called him. Ivar the cripple, Ivar the useless. Each name was a wound that never healed, but somewhere in that humiliation, something else grew. While his brothers practiced with swords, Ivar practiced with his mind. He observed, he calculated. He learned that words could cut deeper than blades, that fear was more powerful than muscle, that a man who could not fight with his hands could still destroy with his thoughts. By the time he reached manhood, Ivar had transformed his curse into a weapon. The body that should have made him weak had forged a mind sharper than any sword in the north. And when Ragnar died, thrown into a pit of snakes by an English king, that mind turned toward one purpose: revenge. The great heathen army was not just about vengeance. It was proof that the boy they had mocked, the son they had pitied, could command warriors his brothers could only follow. The labor lasted through the night. Aslaug screamed behind the wooden walls of the longhouse, while Ragnar Lodbrok paced outside, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. The year was 835, and winter had arrived early in Kattegat. Snow covered the roofs, and the fjord was beginning to freeze at the edges. Inside, the midwives worked by firelight. They had delivered hundreds of babies in their lifetimes, but this one felt different from the start. The child did not want to come. When he finally emerged, covered in blood and screaming, the oldest midwife wrapped him in cloth and felt the wrongness immediately. The legs bent at unnatural angles. The bones felt soft beneath her fingers, as if the child had been formed from clay instead of flesh. She looked at Aslog, who lay exhausted on the bed, and saw the queen's face change. Aslog knew. Mothers always knew. "Let me see him," Aslog whispered. The midwife hesitated. In Viking society, a deformed child was often considered a sign of displeasure from the gods. Some families left such babies in the forest to die of exposure. It was not seen as murder, but as returning to the gods what the gods had rejected. The child would freeze within hours, and the family would be free to try again. But Aslaug was not some farmer's wife. She was the daughter of the legendary hero Sigurd and the shield maiden Brynhildr. She had her own connection to the divine, her own interpretation of fate. She took the baby in her arms and looked down at the twisted little body. "His name is Ivar," she said quietly, "and he will live." The midwives exchanged glances. They did not argue with the queen, but they knew what they had felt. The child's bones were wrong. He would never walk. He would never fight. In a culture built on strength and conquest, what kind of life could he have? Ragnar entered the room and looked at his newborn son. He was a man who had sailed to the edges of the known world, who had raided Paris and walked away with gold. He had faced storms and battles and betrayals. But standing there, looking at the fragile child in his wife's arms, he felt something he rarely experienced: uncertainty. "The gods have marked him," Aslaug said before Ragnar could speak. "But marked does not mean cursed. Sometimes the gods test us in ways we do not understand." Ragnar reached out and touched the baby's head. The child stopped crying and looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too aware for a newborn. In those eyes, Ragnar saw something that made him decide. Not pity, not weakness, but a kind of fierce intelligence, a will to survive that had nothing to do with the strength of the body. "He lives," Ragnar said simply. And so Ivar grew up in the household of the most famous Viking in the north. But growing up was not the same as thriving. From the moment he could understand language, Ivar knew he was different. His brothers learned to walk and then to run. Ivar learned to drag himself across the floor using his arms. His brothers picked up wooden swords and practiced fighting. Ivar watched from the corner, his useless legs trailing behind him like dead weight. The other children in Kattegat were not kind. Children never are when they sense weakness. They called him names: boneless, cripple, half-boy. Some of the crueler ones would imitate the way he moved, dragging themselves across the ground in exaggerated parody while their friends laughed. Ivar learned quickly that crying only made it worse. So he stopped crying. Instead, he learned to watch. He watched the way the bullies moved, the way they picked their targets, the way they always traveled in packs because alone they were nothing. He learned that cruelty came from fear, and fear came from insecurity. And he learned to use words as weapons. The first time Ivar destroyed someone with language alone, he was 7 years old. A boy named Olaf, the son of a wealthy trader, had been tormenting him for weeks. Olaf was big for his age, strong, popular. He had pushed Ivar into the mud in front of a group of other children and stood there laughing, waiting for Ivar to cry or beg. Instead, Ivar looked up at him and smiled. "Your father pays other men to protect his ships because he is too afraid to fight, and you are just like him, big and loud and weak where it matters." The other children went quiet. Olaf's face turned red. He kicked Ivar in the ribs, hard enough to leave bruises for a week. But the damage was done. Everyone had heard, and everyone knew it was true. Olaf's father was known for hiring mercenaries instead of fighting his own battles. Within days, the other children were whispering about it. Olaf's reputation never recovered. Ivar's ribs healed. The lesson stayed with him forever. The right words at the right moment could destroy a person more thoroughly than any blade. His brothers noticed the change in him. Bjorn, the eldest, was already becoming the warrior everyone expected him to be, strong, brave, straightforward. Ubi was the diplomat, always trying to keep the peace. Hvitserk followed wherever the wind blew, and Sigurd, closest to Ivar in age, seemed to resent him the most. Perhaps because Sigurd himself felt overlooked, caught between the golden Bjorn and the tragic Ivar. But even they began to see that Ivar's mind worked differently. While they practiced swordplay, Ivar studied the practice itself. He noticed patterns. He saw when a fighter favored one side, when they left an opening, when they telegraphed their next move. He could not hold a sword, but he could predict every strike. Ragnar noticed too. The great Viking began to spend more time with his youngest son, not out of pity, but out of genuine interest. He would bring Ivar to the strategy meetings before raids, let him listen as the warriors planned their attacks. At first, the men were uncomfortable with the boy's presence. A cripple at a war council seemed like bad luck. Then one day, when the men were arguing about how to approach a fortified town on the coast of Francia, Ivar spoke up. His voice was still high with youth, but it cut through the argument like a knife through fog. "You're all thinking about the walls," he said, "but walls only matter if the enemy stays behind them. Make them come out." The men stared at him. One of them, a grizzled warrior named Knut, laughed. "And how do we do that, boy? Ask them nicely." "Burn their fields," Ivar said calmly. "Not the town. The fields outside. They're food for the winter. They will have to come out to stop you, or they will starve. When they come out, you kill them in the open where walls mean nothing." The silence that followed was different from before. The men looked at each other. Knut stopped laughing. Ragnar leaned back in his chair with a slight smile on his face. They used Ivar's strategy. It worked perfectly. The town surrendered within 3 days. After that, the warriors stopped seeing Ivar as a cripple who needed to be tolerated. They began to see him as something else, something useful, something dangerous. But usefulness did not mean acceptance. Ivar was still the boy who could not walk, who had to be carried everywhere, who could not join the training or the hunts or the casual violence that bonded young men together. He was respected, but not loved, feared, but not embraced. And in that gap between respect and affection, something cold began to grow in Ivar's heart. He watched his brothers receive praise for swinging swords and felt nothing. He watched them laugh together and felt no desire to join them. Slowly, methodically, he was learning to live without warmth. He was becoming something harder than bone, sharper than steel. His mother saw it. Aslog would sometimes sit with him in the evenings and try to soften the edges that were forming. "You have a gift," she would tell him. "The gods gave you a mind that others do not have. Do not let bitterness poison that gift." But Ivar was already learning that bitterness could be useful too. Anger sharpened focus. Resentment fueled determination. The pain of being different could be transformed into the will to prove everyone wrong. By the time Ivar reached his teenage years, he had become someone even his own family treated with caution. He had learned to navigate the world from a position of physical weakness by making everyone around him feel slightly uncomfortable, slightly off balance. His humor was cruel and precise. His observations cut to the bone. He knew everyone's secrets and used them without hesitation. He was not yet a leader, but he was no longer a victim either. He was something in between, a mind without a body that worked, a will that refused to break, a rage that burned slow and cold and patient. And when news arrived that Ragnar Lodbrok had been captured and killed by King Aelle of Northumbria, thrown into a pit of venomous snakes to die in agony, that cold rage finally found its purpose. The brothers gathered to discuss revenge. Bjorn wanted to sail immediately. Ube counseled patience. Sigurd doubted they had the strength to take on an entire English kingdom. They argued for hours, going in circles, getting nowhere. Then Ivar spoke. His voice was quiet, but everyone stopped to listen. "We do not raid England," he said. "We conquer it." The training yard in Kattegat was a rectangle of packed earth surrounded by wooden fences. Every morning just after dawn, the sound of wood striking wood echoed across the settlement as boys practiced with wooden swords and shields. Ivar sat at the edge of the yard, his back against the fence, his useless legs stretched out in front of him. He was 10 years old, and he had been watching this same scene for as long as he could remember. Bjorn was in the center of the yard, dueling with a boy 2 years older. Even at 15, Bjorn moved with the confidence of a seasoned warrior. His strikes were powerful, his defense solid. The older boy was good, but Bjorn was better. Within minutes, the older boy was on his back in the dirt, Bjorn's wooden sword at his throat. The other boys cheered. Bjorn helped his opponent to his feet with a grin. This was what Vikings admired. Strength demonstrated, respect earned, bonds formed through combat. Ivar watched without expression. He had long ago stopped feeling envy. Envy was useless. Instead, he studied. He noticed that Bjorn, for all his skill, had a pattern. He always feinted to the left before striking right. It worked because he was fast enough that most opponents could not react in time. But the pattern was there. A truly observant fighter could exploit it. Ivar filed the information away in the part of his mind where he kept everything. He learned about everyone around him. Ubi was sparring with Hvitserk on the other side of the yard. Ubi fought more carefully than Bjorn, thinking 3 moves ahead, using defense as offense. Hvitserk was wild and unpredictable, which made him dangerous but also sloppy. And Sigurd, the brother closest to Ivar's age, was practicing alone in the corner, striking at a wooden post with more anger than technique. Sigurd felt overlooked. Ivar knew this because he paid attention to things other people missed. Sigurd was not as strong as Bjorn, not as smart as Ubi, not as naturally talented as Hvitserk. He was the middle child in a family of extraordinary people, and it ate at him. That resentment would be useful someday. Ivar stored that information too. "Why do you just sit there?" a voice said. Ivar looked up. A girl named Freydis stood over him, her arms crossed. She was the daughter of a blacksmith, maybe a year younger than Ivar, with pale hair and eyes that seemed too large for her face. Unlike the other children, she had never mocked him. She had never helped him either, but at least she did not pretend he did not exist. "I am watching," Ivar said. "You watch every day. Does it not make you angry that you cannot join them?" "Anger without purpose is just noise," Ivar replied. "I cannot fight like they do, so I learned to fight differently." Freydis tilted her head, considering this. "How do you fight if you cannot hold a sword?" "I learn where the sword will be before it gets there. I learn which men are truly brave and which ones only pretend. I learn who can be trusted and who will run when things get difficult. When my brothers fight, they see an opponent. I see weakness and strength and fear and pride all mixed together. That is how I fight." The girl sat down next to him, which surprised Ivar. People did not usually choose to sit with him. "You sound older than you are," she said. "I have had a lot of time to think." They sat in silence for a while, watching the training. Then Freydis said something that Ivar would remember for the rest of his life. "My father says that the strongest weapon in the world is not made of iron. It is made of knowing things other people do not know." Ivar looked at her with new interest. "Your father is a smart man. He says you are too. He says Ragnar's youngest son has a mind like a trap. Once something goes in, it never escapes." Ivar smiled, which was rare enough that Freydis noticed. "Tell your father he is right. From that day on, Freydis would sometimes sit with him at the edge of the training yard. She did not pity him, and she did not try to make him feel better about his condition. She simply treated him like a person worth talking to. In a world where most people either stared or looked away, that was more valuable than she could know. But Freydis was an exception. Most of Kattegat still saw Ivar as the crippled son of Ragnar Lodbrok. Tragic, perhaps, but ultimately irrelevant to the future of the clan. They did not see what was growing inside him. They did not notice that every insult, every dismissive glance, every moment of being excluded was being catalogued and stored. When Ivar was 12, his father took him on a raid for the first time. Not to fight, obviously, but to observe. The target was a small monastery on the coast of Francia, the kind of easy raid that experienced Vikings used to train younger warriors. Ragnar had 6 ships and about 200 men. The plan was simple: land at dawn, take the treasure, leave before any Frankish soldiers could respond. Ivar sat in the prow of Ragnar's ship as they approached the coast. The smell of salt water mixed with the sweat of the rowers. The sound of oars cutting through the waves was rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Ivar had never been on a raid before, and he felt something stirring in his chest that might have been excitement or might have been fear. He could not tell the difference. The monastery was small, built of grey stone, sitting on a cliff overlooking the sea. Monks in brown robes were moving between buildings, starting their morning routines. They had no idea what was coming. Vikings had not raided this far south in several years. They had grown comfortable. Comfortable was the same as careless. Ragnar's ships landed on the beach below the cliff. The warriors poured out, weapons ready, moving up the narrow path that led to the monastery. Ivar stayed on the ship with 2 men assigned to guard him. He hated it, being left behind like a piece of cargo, but he understood the logic. He could not climb the cliff path. He would be a liability in combat. So he watched from the ship as the raid unfolded. The monks tried to run. Some made it to the chapel, barricading the doors. The Vikings set fire to the building. Within minutes, the monks stumbled out, choking on smoke, and were cut down or captured. The whole thing was over in less than an hour. The warriors came back down the cliff path, carrying sacks of silver, golden candlesticks, illuminated manuscripts that they would sell to merchants who knew collectors. They were laughing, retelling moments from the raid, already turning it into the stories they would tell in the mead hall that night. Bjorn had killed 2 monks who tried to defend the altar. Ubbe had found a hidden vault beneath the chapel floor. Even Fitzurk had acquitted himself well. Ivar sat in the ship and felt the familiar sensation of being outside the circle. His brothers would have stories, he would have none. They would be celebrated. He would be the one who stayed behind. Again. But then Ragnar climbed back into the ship and sat down next to him. The great Viking was covered in ash and blood, his face flushed from exertion. He looked at his youngest son and said, "Tell me what you saw." Ivar blinked. "What do you mean? You watched the raid from here. Tell me what you saw. What did we do right? What did we do wrong?" Ivar thought about it. He had indeed been watching, even though he had not realized he was analyzing. "You did not send scouts ahead," he said slowly. "You assumed the monastery would be undefended, and it was. But if there had been soldiers nearby, you would not have known until they appeared. You could have been trapped on that cliff path." Ragnar nodded. "What else?" "You set fire to the chapel while the monks were still inside. That forced them out, which was smart. But some of the treasure might have burned. A fire that big is hard to control. You could have lost more than you gained. What else?" The men were not watching the path behind them. They were focused on the monastery. If an enemy had come from inland, you would have had no warning. Your retreat route was unguarded. Ragnar was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, not the broad public smile he used in the mead hall, but a smaller, more genuine expression. Most men, he said, see only what is directly in front of them. They think about the battle they are in, not the battle they might have to fight next. You are 12 years old, and you already think like a commander. A commander who cannot walk, Ivar said bitterly. A commander who can see. Ragnar put a hand on his son's shoulder. Legs carry you across a field. Eyes and a mind carry you across a lifetime. You have something your brothers do not have. Do not waste it wishing you had what they have. It was one of the few times Ragnar spoke to Ivar, not as a father managing a difficult child, but as one strategist to another. The moment lasted only seconds, but it burned itself into Ivar's memory. His father, the legendary Ragnar Lodbrok, had looked at him and seen not a cripple but a mind worth respecting. From that day forward, Ivar approached his observations with new purpose. He was not just watching to pass the time, he was training. While his brothers learned to swing swords, Ivar learned to read battles before they happened. While they practiced footwork, he practiced predicting human behavior. While they built muscle, he built something else, a comprehensive understanding of violence that went beyond mere participation. He learned the logistics of raiding, how much food a ship needed for a week at sea, how weather patterns affected sailing routes, how to estimate the wealth of a target based on its architecture. He learned the politics of the Viking world, which jarls were ambitious, which ones were cautious, which alliances were strong, and which were held together by nothing more than convenience. He learned the psychology of warriors, who would fight to the death, who would run when things got difficult, who could be inspired and who could be intimidated. His brothers practiced for hours every day and became excellent fighters. Ivar observed for hours every day and became something rarer, a tactician who understood not just how battles were won, but why they were fought in the first place. By the time he was 15, the warriors in Kattegat had stopped making jokes about the boneless boy sitting at the edge of the training yard. They had started to notice that the boy had opinions about their techniques, and those opinions were usually right. They had started to notice that Ragnar consulted with Ivar before making strategic decisions. They had started to realize that the crippled son of Ragnar Lodbrok understood war better than men who had been fighting for 20 years. And Ivar, for his part, had learned the most important lesson of his life. The body was temporary, but the mind was everything. His brothers would grow old, slow down, lose the strength that defined them, but Ivar's weapon would only get sharper with time. He could not walk, but he could think circles around anyone in the north. And in a world built on violence, the man who understood violence best was the most dangerous man alive. Ivar was 16 when he killed a man for the first time, not with a sword or an axe, but with words that cut deeper than any blade could reach. The man's name was Einar, a warrior in his 30s who had sailed with Ragnar on a dozen raids. He was strong, confident, and cruel in the particular way that men become when they have never faced real consequences. Einar had been drinking in the great hall one night when he decided that Ivar's presence at the high table was an insult to real warriors. "Why does the cripple sit with us?" Einar said loudly enough for the entire hall to hear. The conversations around them died. He has never held a sword. He has never shed blood. He sits there like an ornament, while men who have earned their place stand in the back. Ivar had been eating quietly, but now he set down his cup and looked at Einar with the same calm expression he used when studying an opponent in the training yard. The hall was silent. Everyone wanted to see how the boneless son of Ragnar would respond to such a direct challenge. "You are right," Ivar said evenly. "I have never held a sword, but I have held something more dangerous." "What?" Einar laughed. "So your mother's hand." The men around him chuckled nervously. They sensed where this was going, but Einar was too drunk and too arrogant to see the trap. "Information," Ivar said. "For example, I know that last month you told Jarl Borg you would sail with him to raid the Orkney Islands. You took his silver. Then you told my father you would sail with him instead. You kept Borg's silver and never returned it." The laughter stopped. Einar's face changed color. Jarl Borg was not a man to be cheated. He was known for his cruelty, for the creative ways he punished those who betrayed him. The hall was suddenly very quiet. "You are lying," Einar said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Am I?" Ivar leaned forward slightly. "Shall we bring Jarl Borg here and ask him? I'm certain he would be very interested to know where you have been hiding. Or perhaps we should discuss the fisherman's daughter you visit in secret. The one whose father thinks she is still a virgin. The one whose brothers have sworn to kill any man who touches her." Einar stood up, his hand moving toward his knife, but he did not draw it. Around the hall, other warriors had shifted, their hands near their own weapons, not to defend Einar but to stop him if he attacked the son of Ragnar. Einar was cornered, and everyone could see it. "You have a choice," Ivar continued in that same calm voice. "You can try to kill me now here in my father's hall and die before you take 3 steps. Or you can leave Kattegat tonight and hope that Jarl Borg does not find you. I suggest you choose quickly." Einar looked around the hall, saw no allies, and made his decision. He turned and walked out. His footsteps echoed in the silence. No one followed him. By morning, he was gone from Kattegat. 3 weeks later, word came that Jarl Borg's men had found him in a settlement 2 days north. They had skinned him alive. After that night, the warriors in the Great Hall looked at Ivar differently. They understood something fundamental. The boy might not be able to fight, but he could destroy you just as thoroughly. Maybe more so. A sword wound healed or killed quickly. The kind of damage Ivar could inflict lingered and spread like poison. Ragnar had watched the entire exchange from his seat at the head of the table. After Einar left, he raised his cup in a silent toast to his youngest son. Ivar raised his own cup in return. No words were needed. They both understood what had just happened. Ivar had claimed his place at the table not through birthright, but through demonstration of power. But respect built on fear was fragile. Ivar knew this. He needed to be more than just dangerous. He needed to be useful. So he began to involve himself more deeply in the planning of raids, in the politics of the various jarls and chieftains who came to Kattegat seeking alliances or settling disputes. When Jarl Haraldsson arrived from the north, claiming that Ragnar owed him compensation for a ship that had sunk during a joint raid, Ivar sat through the negotiations and said nothing for 2 hours. He watched Haraldsson's face, studied his gestures, noticed the moments when the Jarl looked away or changed the subject. Then, when there was a pause in the conversation, Ivar spoke up. "The ship did not sink in a storm, did it?" Ivar said quietly. Haraldsson's eyes narrowed. "What are you implying, boy?" "I am not implying anything. I am observing that you will not describe exactly how the ship sank. You talk around it. That means you are hiding something. My guess is that your men were drunk and ran the ship onto rocks in shallow water. You want my father to pay for your crew's incompetence." The color drained from Haraldsson's face. Ragnar looked at Ivar, then back at Haraldsson. "Is this true?" Haraldsson opened his mouth, closed it, then tried to summon outrage. But the damage was done. He had hesitated too long. Everyone in the room knew Ivar was right. The Jarl left without compensation and without his dignity. Stories like this spread. Ivar the Boneless might not be able to walk, but he could see through lies, predict behavior, find the weakness in any argument or person. Chieftains began to seek his counsel. Warriors asked his opinion before making decisions. Even his brothers, who had spent their lives being the strong ones, the capable ones, started to defer to him in matters of strategy. Bjorn struggled with this the most. He was the eldest son, the golden child, the one everyone expected to lead after Ragnar. But increasingly, people were looking to Ivar for answers. It created a tension between them that would never fully resolve. Bjorn could beat Ivar in any physical contest, but in the battles that mattered, the ones fought with words and wits and long-term planning, Ivar won every time. Ubi adapted more easily. He was diplomatic by nature, and he recognized that Ivar's skills complemented rather than threatened his own. Ubi could negotiate with allies. Ivar could destroy enemies. Together, they made a formidable team. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and the understanding that they needed each other. Hevitsirk simply followed whoever seemed most likely to succeed at any given moment. He was loyal in the way that water was loyal, taking the path of least resistance, conforming to whatever container held him. Ivar did not trust him, but he did not need to. Hevitsirk would always side with power. Sigurd, though, was different. Sigurd resented Ivar with a passion that went beyond simple jealousy. They were close in age, and Sigurd had spent his entire life being overlooked, while Ivar, the cripple, the broken one, received attention and respect. It was not fair. Sigurd could walk, could fight, could do everything a Viking was supposed to do. Yet people listened to Ivar. The brothers clashed constantly. Small arguments that escalated into shouting matches, insults traded across the dinner table. Once Sigurd made the mistake of mocking Ivar's legs in front of a group of warriors. Ivar responded by calmly listing every mistake Sigurd had made in training that week, every tactical error, every moment of cowardice or poor judgment. By the time Ivar was finished, Sigurd was shaking with rage and humiliation. "At least I can walk," Sigurd spat. "Yes," Ivar replied. "You can walk. You can run. You can do everything with your legs that I cannot do with mine. And yet here we are, with everyone in this room knowing that if we went to war, they would follow me and not you. Why do you think that is?" Sigurd had no answer. He stormed out, and the warriors in the room tried very hard not to smile. The crippled son had just destroyed his able-bodied brother without raising his voice or his fists. It was the kind of victory that people remembered. But Ivar's relationship with his family was complicated by something deeper than sibling rivalry. His mother Aslaug watched him with increasing concern as he grew older. She saw the coldness that was spreading through him, the way he calculated every interaction, the absence of warmth even when he smiled. She tried to reach him, to remind him that power without compassion led only to loneliness. "You are my son," she told him one evening when they were alone. "But sometimes I look at you, and I do not recognize who you are becoming." "I am becoming what I need to be," Ivar replied. "The world does not reward compassion. You of all people should know that." "The world rewards strength," Aslaug said. "But there are different kinds of strength. The kind you are building is impressive, but it is also brittle. It will crack when you need it most." Ivar looked at his mother with something that might have been sadness, or might have been contempt. "You wanted me to survive. I am surviving. This is what survival looks like when you are born like me." Aslaug had no response to that. How could she? She had protected him, kept him alive when tradition demanded his death, but she had not known what she was creating. The boy who should have died in the forest had instead become something harder and sharper than anyone could have predicted. Ragnar saw it too, though he interpreted it differently. Where Aslaug saw a son losing his humanity, Ragnar saw a weapon being forged. He encouraged Ivar's ruthlessness, his strategic thinking, his willingness to do what others would not. Ragnar had built his reputation on being unconventional, on seeing possibilities that other Vikings missed. In Ivar, he saw that same quality amplified and refined. "You understand something that your brothers do not," Ragnar told him once. "They think war is about courage and strength, but war is about will. The side that wants it more, that is willing to sacrifice more, that can endure more suffering, that is the side that wins. You have more will in your broken body than most men have in their entire armies. Ivar absorbed these lessons like a sponge absorbing water. Every conversation with his father was an education in power, in leadership, in the mechanics of conquest. Ragnar was teaching him not just how to win battles, but how to think about victory itself. How to identify what truly mattered and what was merely symbolic. How to manipulate allies and terrorize enemies. How to build a reputation that made half the work of conquest unnecessary. By the time Ivar was 18, he had become one of the most influential voices in Kattegat, despite never having fought in a battle. Warriors sought his advice. Jarls invited him to councils. Even the skeptics who had once dismissed him as Ragnar's crippled son now treated him with wary respect. But respect was not affection. Authority was not love. Ivar had power, but he had very few friends. He had allies and subordinates and people who feared him, but almost no one who genuinely cared about him as a person. Freydis, the blacksmith's daughter, was one of the few exceptions. She still sat with him sometimes, still spoke to him without calculation or fear. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked him one day. "Regret what?" "Becoming this person that everyone fears." Ivar thought about the question seriously. "No," he said finally, "because the alternative was being pitied, and I would rather be feared than pitied. Fear keeps you alive. Pity gets you left in the forest to freeze." Freydis nodded slowly. She understood, even if she did not entirely agree. "Just remember," she said, "that the things that keep you alive are not always the same things that make life worth living." It was a wise observation, but Ivar had no use for it. He had spent his entire life learning to survive in a world that did not want him. He had transformed weakness into power, contempt into authority, exclusion into dominance. He had won by every metric that mattered in Viking society. And then his father died, screaming in a pit of snakes, and everything changed. The messenger arrived in Kattegat on a grey morning in late autumn. He was English, which was unusual. He wore the colours of King Aella of Northumbria, which was even more unusual, and the message he carried would change everything. Ivar was in the great hall when the messenger was brought before the brothers. Bjorn, Ubbe, Hvitserk and Sigurd were all present. Their mother, Aslaug, sat in Ragnar's chair, though everyone knew she was only keeping it warm. Ragnar had been gone for months, having sailed to England with a small force on what he claimed would be his final raid. He had taken only 2 ships and a handful of men. At the time, people had whispered that the great Ragnar Lodbrok was getting old, losing his edge, chasing past glories. The English messenger stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by Vikings who wanted to kill him simply for being English. But custom protected messengers, even ones bearing bad news. He cleared his throat and spoke in heavily accented Norse. "I come from King Aella of Northumbria," he said. "I bring word of Ragnar Lodbrok." The hall went completely silent. Aslaug leaned forward. "Speak," she said. "Ragnar Lodbrok is dead," the messenger said. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward. "He was captured after his ships were destroyed in a storm. King Aella held a trial and found him guilty of invasion and murder. The sentence was carried out 3 days ago. Ragnar Lodbrok was thrown into a pit of venomous snakes, where he died." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Bjorn stood up so violently that his chair fell backward. His hand went to his sword. Around the hall, other warriors reached for their weapons. The messenger took a step back, suddenly aware of how close to death he was. "Wait," Aslaug said. Her voice was quiet, but everyone stopped. She looked at the messenger with eyes that had gone completely cold. "Did he suffer?" The messenger hesitated. King Aila says that Ragnar sang as he died, songs about his life, his victories. He sang until the venom stopped his voice. That detail, more than anything else, convinced them it was true. Ragnar would absolutely sing his own death song. It was exactly the kind of gesture he would make, turning his execution into one final performance, one last way to prove that no one, not even death itself, could break him. Bjorn's hand was still on his sword. "You brought this message knowing we would want to kill you." "I am only the messenger," the man said. "King Aila sends word that Ragnar's death was justice for the lives he took. He says that any further attacks on Northumbria will be met with the same fate." Ubi made a sound that was half laugh, half growl. "He thinks we will be intimidated." "I think," Ivar said quietly, "that King Aila is an idiot." Everyone turned to look at him. Ivar had not moved from his seat. His face showed no emotion at all. He might have been discussing the weather instead of his father's death. "An idiot," Sigurd said incredulously. "He killed our father." "Exactly," Ivar replied. "He killed Ragnar Lodbrok and then sent a messenger to tell us about it. He gave us a legitimate reason to invade England and slaughter everyone in his kingdom. If he had been smart, he would have killed Ragnar quietly and denied everything. Instead, he executed the most famous Viking in the world and announced it to his sons. That is not strategy. That is stupidity mixed with arrogance." The messenger was sweating now despite the cold. "I have delivered my message. May I go?" "No," Ivar said. "You will stay here as our guest until we decide what to do with you. Take him to the storage house. Give him food and water, but keep him under guard." Two warriors grabbed the messenger and dragged him away. As soon as he was gone, the hall erupted. Warriors shouting about revenge, about sailing to England immediately, about showing King Aila what happened when you killed a legend. Bjorn was the loudest, his face red with rage, demanding ships and men and weapons. Aslaug let them shout for a few minutes, then raised her hand. The noise subsided gradually. "We will have revenge," she said, "but revenge requires planning. Sit down, all of you." The brothers returned to their seats. The hall remained full of warriors, all of them waiting to see what would happen next. The sons of Ragnar Lodbrok, faced with the death of their father, would define themselves by how they responded. Bjorn spoke first. "We sail to Northumbria. We find King Aila. We kill him and everyone who serves him. Then we burn the whole kingdom to the ground." "With what army?" Ubi asked. "We have perhaps 300 warriors in Kattegat. King Aila rules an entire kingdom. He has thousands of soldiers. We would be slaughtered before we got within a mile of him." "Then we die like warriors," Bjorn shot back. "Better than letting our father's death go unanswered." "Dying like warriors accomplishes nothing except making us dead," Ubi said. "We need allies. We need more men. We need time to prepare." "Time?" Bjorn's voice rose. "Our father is dead. He died in agony, covered in snake bites, knowing that his sons were not there to save him. And you want to wait?" Hvitserk looked between his brothers, uncertain. Sigurd sat quietly, his face unreadable. And Ivar watched them all argue, saying nothing, his mind already 3 moves ahead of the conversation. Finally he spoke. "You are both wrong." The brothers turned to him. Bjorn's face was hostile. "Then enlighten us, little brother. What would you do?" "I would not raid Northumbria," Ivar said calmly. "I would conquer England." The hall went silent again. Warriors looked at each other in confusion. Aslaug was watching Ivar with an expression that was hard to read. Part concern, part curiosity, part something that might have been pride. "Conquer England," Bjorn repeated flatly. "You have lost your mind." "Have I?" Ivar leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, brother, what happens if we sail to Northumbria with 300 men and somehow manage to kill King Aila? What then? We sail home having avenged our father's death, and England continues as it was. Next year or the year after, Some other English king raids our shores and we do this all over again. We win one battle and solve nothing. So what are you suggesting? Ubi asked. I'm suggesting that we do what our father always dreamed of doing, but never quite achieved. We do not just raid England, we take it. We gather every Viking who ever sailed with Ragnar, every Jarl who respected him, every warrior who wants glory and land and riches. We build an army so large that the English have never seen anything like it, and then we cross the sea not as raiders, but as conquerors. The hall was completely silent now. Warriors were leaning forward, straining to hear every word. This was not the kind of thing Vikings typically planned. They raided. They took treasure and left. They did not conquer foreign kingdoms. That was what the Saxons did, or the Franks, not the Norse. You are talking about an invasion, Ubi said slowly. A full military invasion of another country. That would take thousands of men, dozens of ships, months of planning. The logistics alone are within our capabilities, Ivar interrupted. Every Jarl in Scandinavia knew Ragnar. Most of them owe him debts or favors. Some of them hated him, but even they respected him. His death is an insult to every Viking who ever sailed under his banner or benefited from his reputation. If we send word that the sons of Ragnar are gathering an army to avenge his death and conquer England, warriors will come from every corner of the Norse world. Not for us, for him, for the legend of Ragnar Lodbrok. Bjorn was shaking his head. You are describing something that has never been done. Exactly, Ivar said, which is why people will want to be part of it. Think about it. Every warrior dreams of being part of something that will be remembered forever. Every Jarl wants to expand his power and wealth. We are offering them both. A chance to avenge the greatest Viking who ever lived and to claim territory in England. Land they can settle, cities they can rule. This is not just revenge. This is an opportunity. Aslaug spoke for the first time in minutes. You would need a leader. Someone all the Jarls would follow. Someone who could unite the clans under one banner. We have 5 leaders, Ivar said, gesturing to himself and his brothers. The sons of Ragnar. Together we represent his legacy. Separately we are just young men with no real authority. But together, we are the continuation of Ragnar's story. That is what people will follow. Not us as individuals, but us as his sons, completing what he started. Sigurd finally spoke up. You are talking about something that could take years. Our father deserves revenge now, not later. Our father deserves revenge that matters, Ivar replied. He deserves revenge that changes the world. Killing one English king satisfies our anger, but accomplishes nothing else. Conquering England turns his death into a catalyst for something greater than any of us. That is the kind of legacy worthy of Ragnar Lodbrok. The logic was compelling, and everyone in the hall could feel it. This was not just about emotion or honor. This was about strategy, about using tragedy as fuel for something unprecedented. Ivar was offering them a way to transform grief into purpose, anger into ambition. Ubi studied his youngest brother. You have been thinking about this for a while, have you not? This is not something you just came up with in the last hour. I have been thinking about it since I was old enough to understand what our father represented, Ivar admitted. Ragnar spent his life pushing boundaries, going farther than anyone thought possible. He raided Paris. He explored the edges of the known world. He married a queen and fathered sons who would carry on his name. Everything he did was about leaving a mark that would last forever. His death gives us the opportunity to create the mark he never quite achieved on his own. Bjorn stood up and walked to the center of the hall. He looked at the warriors gathered there, then back at his brothers. His face was still flushed with anger, but something else was there now too. Calculation. Bjorn was many things, but he was not stupid. He could see what Ivar was offering. "If we do this," Bjorn said slowly, "we do it properly. Not as a raid that gets out of hand, but as a real invasion. We would need ships, supplies, weapons. We would need to organize the Jarls, coordinate the clans, plan routes and strategies. This would be the largest military operation the Norse have ever attempted." "Yes," Ivar agreed. "It would be. And if it fails, if we cross the sea with this great army and the English destroy us, the sons of Ragnar will be remembered not as avengers, but as fools who overreached." "Also true," Ivar said. "But if we succeed, we become something more than our father ever was. We become the men who changed the world." The brothers looked at each other. Years of rivalry and resentment hung between them, but so did something else. The shared weight of their father's legacy, the understanding that they were being offered a chance to do something that would echo through history. Ube was the first to commit. "I am with Ivar. We build the army. We plan the invasion. We do this correctly." Hvitserk nodded. "If Ube is in, then I am in." Sigurd hesitated, his face twisted with conflicting emotions. He hated that Ivar was the one proposing this, hated that even now, in the moment of their father's death, it was the crippled brother who had the clearest vision. But he could see the logic. He could see the opportunity. "I am in," he said finally. "But I still think you are insane." All eyes turned to Bjorn. He was the eldest. His approval or rejection would determine whether this actually happened. He stood there for a long moment, jaw clenched, thinking through all the implications. Then he smiled, a cold, dangerous smile that reminded everyone who his father was. "Let us conquer England," he said. "Let us show King Aella what it means to kill Ragnar Lodbrok." The warriors in the hall erupted in cheers. Swords were raised, horns were filled and drained. The sons of Ragnar had made their decision, and the decision would reshape the world. Ivar sat in his chair, watching the celebration, feeling nothing that showed on his face. Inside, though, something had changed. For the first time in his life, he was not just reacting to the world. He was not just surviving, not just proving he could exist in a society that did not want him. He was leading, and it felt right in a way that nothing else ever had. The first messenger left Kattegat 3 days after the decision was made. He sailed north to Jarl Olaf in Norway, carrying a simple message written in runes on a piece of carved wood. "Ragnar is dead. His sons are gathering an army. Will you join us?" Within a week, 10 more messengers had departed. To Denmark, to Sweden, to the scattered settlements across the Norse world, to jarls and chieftains, to ship captains and warrior clans. Some of the messages were formal invitations, others were personal appeals to men who had fought alongside Ragnar. A few were barely disguised threats to leaders who owed Ragnar debts that had never been repaid. Ivar supervised the sending of every message. He knew which men needed to be flattered, which ones needed to be challenged, which ones would respond to promises of wealth, and which ones only cared about glory. Each message was carefully crafted to appeal to its recipient's particular motivations. It was the kind of work that required patience and precision, exactly the kind of work that Ivar excelled at. The responses came slowly at first. A jarl from the Danish coast sent word that he would contribute 3 ships and 50 men. A Swedish chieftain promised 200 warriors if the invasion succeeded before winter. Small commitments, cautious pledges, men hedging their bets in case the whole enterprise fell apart. Then Jarl Sigvald arrived in person. Sigvald was a legend in his own right, a warrior who had sailed with Ragnar on the raid of Paris 20 years earlier. He was in his 50s now, grey-bearded and scarred, but still powerful. He walked into the great hall of Kattegat with 20 of his best men and looked at the sons of Ragnar with eyes that had seen more battles than most men could imagine. "I heard Ragnar is dead," Sigvald said without preamble. I heard his sons are planning something ambitious. I came to see if it was true, or just the dreams of boys who do not understand how the world works. Bjorn bristled at the implied insult, but Ubbe put a hand on his shoulder. Ivar remained seated, studying Sigvald carefully. This was a test. The old warrior was not here to be convinced with pretty words. He was here to measure whether the sons of Ragnar were worthy of their father's name. Tell me what you heard, Ivar said. I heard you want to invade England, Sigvald replied. Not raid it, invade it, take land, hold territory, conquer kingdoms. I heard you are gathering the largest army the Norse have ever assembled. And what do you think of that? Ivar asked. Sigvald walked closer, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He looked at each of the brothers in turn, Bjorn with his barely controlled rage, Ubbe with his cautious intelligence, Hvitserk with his uncertainty, Sigurd with his resentment. Then his eyes settled on Ivar. I think, Sigvald said slowly, that it is exactly the kind of insane idea Ragnar would have loved. I think it might actually work, and I think that if any of his sons can pull it off, it is the one who cannot walk. The hall was silent. Sigvald's men were watching their leader carefully, waiting to see what he would do. The sons of Ragnar were waiting for him to continue. I will join you, Sigvald said. I will bring 10 ships and 500 men, but I have conditions. Name them, Ivar said. First, I want a share of whatever land we take. Not gold, not treasure, land. Territory I can settle and rule. Second, I want to know the actual plan. Not vague talk of conquest, but specifics. How many men do we need? Where do we land? What is the target? I am too old to sail across the sea on nothing but ambition and hope. Ivar smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had shown since his father's death. Those are reasonable conditions. Ubbe, show him the maps. Ubbe spread a large piece of vellum across the table. It was a map of England, crudely drawn but detailed enough to show the major kingdoms. Northumbria in the north, Mercia in the middle, East Anglia to the east, Wessex in the south. Ivar had been studying this map for weeks, memorizing every detail, considering every possible landing site and strategic target. England is not one kingdom, Ivar explained, pointing to the map. It is 4 kingdoms that barely tolerate each other. Northumbria, where King Aela rules. Mercia, ruled by King Burgred. East Anglia under King Edmund. And Wessex, ruled by King Ethelred. They have separate armies, separate defenses, and a long history of fighting each other. That is their weakness. Sigvald leaned over the map, his eyes narrowing. You want to exploit their divisions. Exactly, Ivar said. If England were united under one strong king, we would have no chance. But it is not united. These kingdoms compete with each other for resources and power. They will not cooperate to defend against us, especially not at first. By the time they understand the threat, we will already have a foothold. Where do we land? Sigvald asked. Ivar's finger moved to the eastern coast. East Anglia. King Edmund is weak, and his kingdom is wealthy but poorly defended. The coastline is accessible, with good beaches for landing ships, and it is close enough to Northumbria that we can move against King Aela quickly once we have established ourselves. What about numbers? Sigvald pressed. How many men do we need to make this work? At least 3,000, Ivar said. Preferably 5,000. Enough to overwhelm any single kingdom's defenses, but not so many that we cannot feed and supply them. The logistics are the difficult part. We need ships to carry men, weapons, food, water, equipment. We need supply lines once we land. We need to move quickly enough that the English cannot organize a unified response, but carefully enough that we do not overextend ourselves. Sigvald straightened up, stroking his beard. You have thought this through. I have thought of little else since my father died, Ivar admitted. This is not an impulse. This is a plan that has been building for weeks. Every detail has been considered. Every contingency has been prepared for. The old warrior looked at the brothers again, then nodded slowly. Your father would be proud. He always said that the real battle is won before the first sword is drawn. You understand that? All right. I am in. And when the other Jarls hear that Sigvald has committed, more will follow. Your father's old allies will not want to be left out. He was right. Over the next 2 months, warriors began arriving in Kattegat, first in small groups, then in larger contingents. Jarls who brought their personal retinues, ship captains who brought their crews, young men seeking glory, and old men seeking one last great adventure. They came from Norway and Denmark and Sweden. They came from Iceland and the Orkney Islands. They came because Ragnar Lodbrok had been the greatest Viking of their generation, and his sons were offering them a chance to be part of something unprecedented. The logistics of managing this influx were staggering. Thousands of warriors needed to be housed, fed, organized. Ships needed to be repaired or built. Weapons needed to be forged or procured. Supplies needed to be gathered and stored. The brothers divided the work among themselves according to their strengths. Bjorn handled the warriors themselves, training them, organizing them into units, establishing the hierarchy of command. He was in his element, respected by the men for his skill and his straightforward manner. Warriors understood Bjorn. He was what they expected a leader to be. Ubbi managed the diplomatic side, negotiating with Jarls, settling disputes between rival groups, maintaining the fragile alliances that held the army together. He was patient and fair, qualities that made him trusted even by men who barely knew him. Hvitserk supervised the supply lines, food, water, equipment. It was unglamorous work, but essential. An army marched on its stomach, as the saying went, and Hvitserk proved surprisingly competent at the mundane details of keeping thousands of men fed and equipped. Sigurd worked with the shipbuilders and navigators, planning routes and ensuring that the fleet would be ready when the time came to sail. He still resented Ivar, but he threw himself into the work with an intensity that suggested he was determined to prove his worth, and Ivar controlled the strategy. He was the spider at the center of the web, coordinating everything, adjusting plans as circumstances changed, thinking 3 moves ahead of everyone else. The other brothers might lead men in their specific areas, but everyone understood that the overall vision belonged to Ivar. The warriors understood it too. They had arrived expecting to follow Bjorn, the eldest and most obviously capable. But within weeks, it became clear that the real power lay with the brother who could not walk. Ivar was the one who knew where every ship would land, what every unit would do, how the invasion would unfold. The brothers might share the title of leadership, but Ivar held the actual authority. This created tension, of course. Bjorn struggled with being the public face of leadership, while Ivar made the actual decisions. They argued constantly about tactics, about timing, about the division of responsibilities. But they needed each other, and both were smart enough to recognize that fact. Bjorn gave the army a warrior to rally around. Ivar gave it a brain. By midsummer, the Great Heathen Army, as people were starting to call it, numbered over 4,000 men. They filled Kattegat and spilled into the surrounding areas, a vast encampment of warriors from across the Norse world. The sheer scale of it was unprecedented. No Viking leader had ever assembled a force this large for a single purpose. The English had no idea what was coming. They knew Vikings raided their coasts. That had been happening for generations. But they thought in terms of longships carrying 50 men, quick strikes on monasteries and coastal towns, raiders who appeared and vanished like ghosts. The concept of an organized invasion force numbering in the thousands was beyond their experience. They had no framework for understanding what was being prepared across the sea. Ivar spent long nights studying the maps and reports that scouts brought back from England. He learned the names of English nobles, the locations of their fortifications, the patterns of their military movements. He learned which kingdoms were strong and which were weak, which leaders were competent and which were arrogant. He gathered information the way other men gathered gold, understanding that knowledge was the most valuable weapon in any war. One night, Freydis found him in the great hall long after everyone else had gone to sleep. He was hunched over the maps by candlelight, his fingers tracing routes and distances. She sat down across from him without asking permission. "You are going to exhaust yourself before the invasion even begins," she said. "I am fine," Ivar replied without looking up. "You are not fine. You have not slept properly in weeks. You barely eat. You sit here every night planning for every possible outcome, as if you can control the entire world through sheer force of will." "Someone has to," Ivar said. "If I do not think of everything, who will? Bjorn? He thinks with his muscles. Ubbe? He is too cautious, too concerned with keeping everyone happy. Hvitzek follows whoever shouts loudest. Sigurd resents me too much to think clearly. It has to be me." Freydis reached across the table and pulled the map away from him. Ivar looked up, startled. "You think you are the only one who can do this," she said quietly. "You think that if you show any weakness, any uncertainty, the whole thing will fall apart. But you are wrong. People follow you not because you are perfect, but because you understand things they do not. You do not have to carry everything alone." "Yes, I do," Ivar said, "because if I fail, if this invasion fails, my father's death means nothing. Everything I have built, everything I have proven, it all disappears. This is my chance to show that I am not just Ragnar's crippled son. This is my chance to become something more." Freydis looked at him with something that might have been pity or might have been sadness. "You have already become something more, everyone can see that. The only person who does not believe it is you." Ivar had no response to that. He took the map back and returned to his planning. Freydis sat with him in silence for a while, then left him to his work. He did not notice her leaving. His mind was already across the sea, already in England, already fighting battles that had not yet begun. By autumn, the great heathen army was ready. 4,000 warriors, over 200 ships, supplies for months of campaigning. It was the largest invasion force the Norse had ever assembled, and it existed because a crippled boy had turned his father's death into an opportunity for conquest. The brothers gathered one last time before departure. They stood on the beach at Kattegat, looking out at the fleet that filled the harbor. Bjorn's face was eager, ready for glory. Ubbe looked thoughtful, already considering the challenges ahead. Hvitzek seemed nervous, but excited. Sigurd was tense, wound tight with anticipation and resentment, and Ivar sat in his litter carried by 4 strong men, looking at the ships with an expression that revealed nothing. Inside, though, he felt something that might have been satisfaction or might have been fear. He had set this in motion. He had convinced thousands of warriors to follow him across the sea. He had promised them victory, land, wealth, glory. Now he had to deliver. The crossing took 5 days. The fleet stretched across the horizon like a floating city, hundreds of sails catching the wind, carrying the largest invasion force the North had ever sent south. The weather held, a stroke of luck that the warriors took as a sign from the gods. Clear skies, steady winds, calm seas. It was as if Odin himself wanted them to reach England. Ivar spent most of the voyage in the prow of the lead ship, watching the grey line of the English coast grow larger with each passing hour. He could not pace nervously like other men might. He could not check his weapons or practice his fighting stance. All he could do was sit and think and plan for every contingency he could imagine. Bjorn stood beside him, one hand resting on the ship's dragon-head figurehead. "Nervous?" he asked. Preparing, Ivar replied. For what? We land, we fight, we win. What else is there to prepare for? Ivar looked at his older brother. Bjorn's worldview was remarkably simple. See the enemy, kill the enemy, celebrate the victory. It worked for him because he was strong enough and skilled enough to make it work. But Ivar's world was more complicated. We need to land without losing half our ships to hidden rocks, Ivar said. We need to establish a defensive position before any English forces can respond. We need to find fresh water immediately because our supplies will not last more than 3 days. We need to send scouts to locate the nearest towns and fortifications. We need to establish communication between the different groups so everyone knows what everyone else is doing. We need to— All right, Bjorn interrupted with a laugh. You have thought of everything as usual, you always do. There was something in Bjorn's tone that might have been resentment or might have been respect, probably both. Their relationship had always been complicated, but the invasion had made it more so. Bjorn was the warrior, the hero, the one the men cheered for. Ivar was the strategist, the planner, the one the men actually obeyed. Both brothers understood that they needed each other, but understanding did not make the dynamic comfortable. The fleet reached the coast of East Anglia on a morning when fog hung thick over the water. Perfect conditions for an invasion. The English would not see them coming until the ships were already beaching. Ivar had chosen this stretch of coastline carefully. It was far enough from any major settlements that they would have time to establish themselves, but close enough to roads that they could move inland quickly once ready. The first ships hit the beach with a grinding sound of wood on sand. Warriors poured out, weapons ready, expecting resistance. But the beach was empty. The fog swirled around them like ghosts, and the only sounds were the waves and the calls of seabirds. It felt anticlimactic after months of preparation. Ivar's ship beached moments later. His bearers carried him down to the sand, and for the first time in his life, Ivar set foot, or rather set litter, on foreign soil. England, the land that had killed his father, the land he intended to conquer. Form defensive positions, Ivar called out. His voice carried across the beach with surprising authority. Bjorn, take 300 men and scout inland. Find the nearest settlement, but do not engage. Ubi, organize the supplies as they come off the ships. Vitsuk, establish a water detail. Find fresh water immediately. Sigurd, coordinate with the ship captains. We need half the fleet to return to Denmark for the second wave of supplies. The brothers moved to their tasks without argument. The invasion had begun, and there was no room for hesitation or dispute. The warriors, too, fell into their assigned roles with surprising efficiency. Months of organization in Kattegat were paying off. Everyone knew what they were supposed to do. By midday, the fog had burned off and the beach had been transformed into a fortified camp. Trenches were being dug, defensive walls erected from timber pulled off the ships, supply depots organized. It looked less like an invasion and more like the construction of a small city, which in a sense was exactly what it was. Bjorn returned in the late afternoon with his scouts. They had found a small English village about 3 miles inland, maybe 200 people undefended, completely unaware that an army had landed on their coast. They had also spotted a larger town farther north, with wooden walls and what looked like a garrison of soldiers. "Do we attack the village?" Bjorn asked. "Not yet," Ivar said. "We need information first. Take 10 men, preferably ones who can speak some English. Go to the village, find the headman or whoever is in charge. Tell them that the sons of Ragnar Lodbrok have arrived to avenge their father. Tell them they have 2 choices, submit and live or resist and die. Let them spread the word to other villages. Fear is a weapon too." Bjorn looked disappointed. He had wanted to fight, to draw blood, to prove that the invasion was real. But he nodded and left to select his men. Ube, who had been listening, waited until Bjorn was out of earshot before speaking. "You are letting him think he is in charge of the raids while you control the actual strategy," Ubi observed. "I am giving him what he needs to feel important while I do what actually needs to be done," Ivar replied. "Is that a problem?" "Not for me, but Bjorn will eventually realize what you are doing, and Sigurd already hates you. You are building resentment that will have to be dealt with eventually." "Eventually is not today," Ivar said. "Today we establish ourselves in England. The problems with my brothers can wait." But Uber's words stayed with him. The alliance between the brothers had always been fragile, held together by the shared goal of avenging their father. What would happen when that goal was achieved? What would happen when they actually had to divide the conquered territory and decide who ruled what? Those were questions Ivar had deliberately avoided thinking about. The future was uncertain enough without borrowing problems that did not exist yet. Over the next 2 weeks, the great heathen army spread across East Anglia like a stain. Villages surrendered without fighting, their leaders choosing survival over futile resistance. The few that resisted were burned as examples. Word spread quickly. The Vikings had returned, but this time they were not raiders. They were conquerors. King Edmund of East Anglia finally responded, sending a force of about 800 soldiers to challenge the invaders. It was a respectable army by English standards, well-armed and reasonably well-trained. Under normal circumstances, it might have had a chance against a Viking raid. But the great heathen army was not a raid. The battle took place in an open field near a town called Thetford. Ivar watched from his litter, positioned on a low hill that gave him a clear view of the entire battlefield. He could not fight, but he could command. And commanding was what he did best. The English formed their traditional shield wall, a solid defensive line that had served Saxon warriors for centuries. It was effective against frontal assaults, designed to break the momentum of attacking forces. The English soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, shields locked, spears bristling forward. They looked formidable. Ivar studied them for a long moment, then turned to his signalmen. "Tell Bjorn to attack from the front with half his force. Make it look like a full assault. Tell Ubbe to take the other half and circle around through the forest to their left flank. When the English turn to face Bjorn's attack, Ubbe hits them from the side. Their shield wall only works if they are facing one direction." The signalman ran to relay the orders. Flags were raised, horns were blown. The Viking forces began to move. Bjorn led his warriors in a direct charge at the English center, exactly the kind of frontal assault the shield wall was designed to stop. The English soldiers braced themselves, confident in their defensive formation. Then Ubbe's force emerged from the forest on their flank. The English line wavered. Soldiers on the end turned to face the new threat, but that broke the integrity of the shield wall. Gaps appeared. Bjorn's warriors, who had been pushing hard against the center, suddenly found openings. They poured through like water through a cracked dam. The battle became a slaughter. English soldiers tried to maintain formation, but they were surrounded, outnumbered, overwhelmed by warriors who had trained for this moment. King Edmund himself was captured, pulled from his horse and dragged before the sons of Ragnar. He was a young man, maybe 30, with the kind of refined features that suggested he had spent more time in churches than on battlefields. He knelt in the mud before Ivar's litter, his fine clothes torn and bloody, his crown lost somewhere in the chaos of defeat. "You are King Edmund," Ivar said. It was not a question. "I am," Edmund replied. His voice shook, but he kept his eyes up. Credit to him for that. Many men in his position would have been weeping. "Your kingdom is conquered. Your army is destroyed. You have lost. Do you understand this?" Edmund nodded slowly. "What happens now?" "That depends on you," Ivar said. "You can accept reality and live, or you can cling to pride and die. Which do you prefer?" "What are your terms?" Ivar had been thinking about this moment for months. The first English king captured would set the precedent for all the others. He needed to be harsh enough to be taken seriously, but not so brutal that other kingdoms would fight to the death rather than surrender. East Anglia becomes tributary to us, Ivar said. You remain king in name, but you rule at our pleasure. Half of your annual tax revenues come to us. You provide food and supplies for our army. You do not interfere with our movements through your territory. In exchange, we do not burn your cities or slaughter your people. You keep your crown and your life. This is a generous offer. I suggest you accept it. Edmund looked at the ground for a long moment. Ivar could see the calculation happening behind the king's eyes, weighing survival against honor, trying to find some angle that would let him keep both. But there was no such angle. The math was simple and brutal. I accept, Edmund said quietly. Say it properly, Ivar commanded, so everyone can hear. Edmund raised his voice, addressing the gathered warriors and the remnants of his own defeated army. I, Edmund, King of East Anglia, accept the terms offered by the sons of Ragnar Lodbrok. My kingdom is tributary to them. I swear to provide supplies and not to interfere with their movements. The Vikings cheered. They had won not just a battle but a kingdom. England was beginning to fall piece by piece, exactly as Ivar had predicted. The warriors who had followed him across the sea were seeing their investment pay off. Land, wealth, power, all the things Ivar had promised were beginning to materialize, but Ivar felt no triumph. He felt only calculation. East Anglia was the weakest of the English kingdoms. Taking it was important symbolically, but it was not the real prize. The real prize was Northumbria. The real prize was King Aella, the man who had killed Ragnar. That night, the great heathen army celebrated their first major victory. Fires burned across the camp, mead flowed freely, and warriors sang songs about the battle. Bjorn was in the center of it all, retelling the fight blow by blow, accepting praise and congratulations. He had led the frontal assault. He had broken the English line. In the minds of the warriors, he was the hero. Ivar sat apart from the celebration, as he always did. Freydis, who had accompanied the army as one of the camp followers, sat down beside him. She had been watching the celebrations with an expression that was hard to read. You won, she said. We won, Ivar corrected. The army won. The army followed your plan. Bjorn gets the glory, but everyone knows you won the battle before it started. Does that bother you? No, Ivar said, and he meant it. Glory is for men who need external validation. I do not need people to sing songs about me. I need them to obey me. As long as they follow my orders, I do not care who they think is the hero. You have become very cold, Freydis observed. Colder than you were in Kattegat. This invasion is changing you. This invasion is revealing who I have always been, Ivar replied. I am not a warrior like Bjorn. I am not a diplomat like Ubbi. I am the one who sees the pattern, who understands how pieces fit together, who knows what needs to happen next. That is who I have always been. The invasion is just the first time I have had the opportunity to prove it on a scale that matters. Freydis was quiet for a moment. What happens when you conquer Northumbria, when you kill King Aella and avenge your father? What happens when the thing that holds you and your brothers together is accomplished? It was the question Ivar had been avoiding. The question Ubbe had asked in a different way. The question that hung over everything like a storm cloud waiting to break. I do not know, Ivar admitted. But that is a problem for future Ivar. Present Ivar has a war to win. He looked out across the camp, at the fires and the warriors, and the foreign land they had just begun to conquer. Somewhere to the north, King Aella was probably hearing news of the invasion, realizing that the sons of Ragnar had come for revenge. Somewhere in that kingdom, a trap was waiting to be sprung, a vengeance waiting to be enacted. Ivar had spent his entire life being underestimated because of his body. King Aelle was about to learn what happened when you underestimated his mind. The crippled son of Ragnar Lodbrok was coming, and he was bringing an army. Winter came early to Northumbria in the year 866. Snow covered the roads and frost turned the ground hard as iron. It was the kind of weather that should have stopped an invasion, that should have forced armies to retreat to winter quarters and wait for spring. But the great heathen army did not retreat. They had come too far, waited too long, wanted revenge too badly. King Aelle heard about the fall of East Anglia from a breathless messenger who had ridden for 3 days straight. The king was in his hall in York, the great city that had been the capital of Northumbria for centuries. He listened to the report with growing disbelief. "How many Vikings?" he asked. "Thousands, my lord. Maybe 4,000, maybe 5. The largest force anyone has ever seen. They landed in East Anglia and conquered the entire kingdom in less than a month. King Edmund surrendered. He is their puppet now." Aelle stood up from his throne, his face flushed with anger. He was a man in his 50s, with grey in his beard and scars on his hands from decades of ruling a kingdom that bordered the violent Scottish lands to the north. He had dealt with Viking raids before. Every English king had, but this sounded different. "Who leads them?" Aelle demanded. "The sons of Ragnar Lodbrok, my lord. All of them together. They call their army the Great Heathen Army. They say they have come to avenge their father's death." The hall went silent. Everyone present understood what that meant. Aelle had executed Ragnar Lodbrok by throwing him into a pit of venomous snakes. It had been meant as a message, a demonstration that even the most famous Viking could be brought low by English power. Instead, it had apparently triggered an invasion. "Ragnar's sons," Aelle said slowly. He remembered the day of the execution, remembered the defiant prisoner singing his death song as the snakes bit into his flesh. Ragnar had warned him, actually. His last words had been something about his sons avenging him. At the time, Aelle had dismissed it as the empty threats of a dying man. Now those threats were materializing with 4,000 warriors behind them. "Where are they now?" Aelle asked. "Moving north, my lord. They are following the old Roman roads. Their scouts have been seen as close as Lincoln. They are coming here, to York, to you." Aelle looked around at his advisors, his warriors, the nobles who had gathered to celebrate the winter feast. They looked back at him with varying degrees of fear and determination. Northumbria could field an army of perhaps 2,000 men if they called up every able-bodied soldier in the kingdom. Against 4,000 or 5,000 Vikings, those were not good odds. "Send word to King Burgred of Mercia," Aelle ordered. "Tell him we need reinforcements. Tell him the Vikings are not just raiding, they are conquering. If Northumbria falls, Mercia will be next. We need a united defense." The messenger bowed and hurried out. Aelle sat back down on his throne, his mind racing through options. York was defensible. It had strong walls, a good position on the river, enough supplies to withstand a siege. If he could hold the city until Mercian reinforcements arrived, they might be able to crush the Viking army between two forces. But that assumed the Vikings would lay siege to York. What if they simply bypassed the city and ravaged the countryside instead? What if they split their forces and attacked multiple targets? What if their strategy was something Aelle had not anticipated? These were the kinds of questions that kept a king awake at night, and the king who had to answer them was the same king who had executed Ragnar Lodbrok, had mocked his threats, had sent a messenger to tell his sons about it. Pride, Aelle was beginning to realize, had consequences. The great heathen army reached the outskirts of York in the middle of a snowstorm. The Vikings made camp in the ruins of an old Roman fort about 2 miles from the city walls. It was a defensible position with clear lines of sight in all directions. The brothers established their command post in what had once been the fort's central building. Ivar studied York from a distance, using a crude telescope made of leather and glass that he had acquired from a Frankish merchant years ago. The city's walls were substantial, stone and timber, well maintained, manned by what looked like at least 500 soldiers. Taking it by direct assault would be costly, possibly disastrous. We could starve them out, Ubi suggested. Surround the city and wait. Winter is here. They will run out of food eventually. Eventually could be months, Bjorn countered. We cannot keep 4,000 men supplied through a winter siege, and the longer we sit here, the more time the other English kingdoms have to organize against us. Then we attack now, Sigurd said. Scale the walls at night, open the gates from the inside. The walls are too well defended, Ivar said, still looking through his telescope. They know we are here. They will be watching for exactly that kind of attack. We need to make them come out. Why would they come out? Bjorn asked. They are safe behind those walls. They have supplies. They can wait for reinforcements from Mercia. Coming out would be stupid. Exactly, Ivar said with a thin smile. So we need to give them a reason to do something stupid. Over the next 3 days, the Vikings did not attack York. Instead, they systematically burned every village and farm within 10 miles of the city. Smoke rose from dozens of locations, visible from York's walls. Refugees streamed into the city, bringing stories of horror, Vikings slaughtering livestock, destroying grain stores, killing anyone who resisted. The refugees also brought something else: hunger. York's supplies were adequate for the city's normal population, but with hundreds of refugees flooding in, those supplies began to dwindle rapidly. The smoke from burning farms was a constant reminder that there would be no resupply from the countryside. King Aelle watched from his walls as his kingdom burned. On the 4th day, Ivar sent a message to the city. A single Viking rode up to the gates under a flag of truce and handed a sealed letter to the guards. The letter was simple and direct. To King Aelle of Northumbria, you killed our father. We have come to return the favor. Come out and face us in open battle, and we will spare your city. Hide behind your walls, and we will burn everything you have ever ruled until there is nothing left but ashes and memories. Choose quickly. The sons of Ragnar Lodbrok. Aelle read the letter 3 times, his hands shaking with rage. The Vikings were offering him a choice between his pride and his kingdom. If he stayed in York, they would destroy Northumbria piece by piece, while he watched helplessly. If he came out to fight, he would be playing into their hands, facing superior numbers on ground of their choosing. But what else could he do? He was a king. He could not cower behind walls while his kingdom burned. And perhaps, just perhaps, the Viking confidence was arrogance. Perhaps he could win. His soldiers were well trained, well armed, fighting for their homes. The Vikings were foreigners in a strange land, far from their ships, overextended. We march out at dawn, Aelle announced to his commanders. We will meet them in the field and show these pagans what English steel can do. Send word to every able man in York. We need every sword we can get. His commanders did not argue, though some of them looked doubtful. The decision was made. King Aelle would face the sons of Ragnar in open battle. It was exactly what Ivar had predicted he would do. The battle was set for a field north of York, wide and flat, with no trees or obstacles that might interfere with formations. Both armies arrived at dawn, their breath misting in the cold air. The English numbered about 1,800 men. Every soldier Aelle could muster from York and the surrounding areas. The Vikings numbered over 3,000. The numerical disadvantage was obvious to everyone. Aelle sat on his horse in the center of the English line, looking across the field at the Viking army. He could see the standards of the different jarls, the mixed groups of warriors from across the Norse world. And there, in the center, he saw something that made him pause. A litter carried by 4 large men, and sitting in that litter, a young man who appeared to be commanding the entire army. "Who is that?" Aella asked one of his advisors. "I do not know, my lord. Perhaps one of Ragnar's sons?" "Which one?" "I cannot tell from this distance." Aella stared at the figure in the litter. There was something unsettling about it. The idea that their enemy's commander could not even stand on his own. What kind of warrior was carried into battle? What kind of leader commanded from a seat? Across the field, Ivar was giving his final orders. His brothers were positioned at different points in the Viking line. Bjorn on the right flank, Ubbi on the left, Hvitserk with the reserves, Sigurd coordinating the archers. They had argued about the battle plan for hours the night before, but eventually everyone had agreed to Ivar's strategy, not because they loved the plan, but because no one had a better alternative. "The English will form their shield wall," Ivar had explained. "It is what they always do. Strong in the center, cavalry on the flanks. Traditional, predictable, effective if we meet them head-on. So we will not meet them head-on." The battle began with the traditional exchange of arrows and insults. The English shield wall was indeed strong. 3 ranks deep, shields locked, spears bristling forward. Aella was visible in the center, rallying his men with speeches about God and England and driving out the pagan invaders. Then Ivar gave the signal. The Viking center advanced slowly, deliberately, as if preparing for a standard frontal assault. The English braced themselves, ready to receive the charge, but the Vikings never charged. They stopped just outside spear range and began to retreat, slowly at first, then faster, as if breaking in panic. The English soldiers saw the Vikings fleeing and let out a cheer. Some of the younger soldiers broke formation and started to chase the retreating enemy. Their commanders tried to hold them back, but the momentum was too strong. The shield wall began to crack as men surged forward, eager to strike at the fleeing pagans. And that was when Bjorn's force hit them from the right flank. The English had been so focused on the center that they had not noticed the Viking right flank curving around behind a low rise in the ground. Bjorn's warriors crashed into the English line from the side, rolling it up like a scroll. Men who had been facing forward suddenly had enemies beside and behind them. The formation collapsed into chaos. Ubbi's force hit them from the left seconds later. The English were surrounded on 3 sides, compressed into a tightening circle. The careful shield wall had become a disorganized mass of men fighting in every direction at once. And the Viking center, which had been retreating moments before, turned around and charged into the English front. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter. King Aella saw his army disintegrating around him and tried to rally his men, tried to restore some kind of order, but it was too late. The Vikings had superior numbers, better positioning, and momentum. English soldiers began to throw down their weapons and run. Some made it a few dozen yards before being cut down. Others surrendered and were taken prisoner. Aella himself fought until his horse was killed beneath him, until he was surrounded by Vikings, who dragged him to the ground and stripped him of his weapons. They bound his hands and hauled him across the field to where the sons of Ragnar waited. Ivar looked down at the English king from his litter. Aella was bleeding from a dozen minor wounds, his fine armor dented and torn, his crown long since lost in the fighting. He looked like what he was, a defeated man who had made a catastrophic mistake. "King Aella," Ivar said quietly, "the man who killed our father." Aella spat blood onto the ground. "Get it over with. Kill me and be done with it." "Oh, we will kill you," Ivar said, "but not quickly, not easily. You threw our father into a pit of snakes and let him die in agony. We are going to return the favor in a way." He gestured to some of the warriors who grabbed Aella and forced him to his knees. Bjorn stepped forward, a knife in his hand. The blade gleamed in the pale winter sunlight. "Do you know what the blood eagle is?" Bjorn asked. Aella's face went white. Everyone had heard of the Blood Eagle, the most brutal execution in the Viking world, reserved for the worst enemies. It involved cutting the ribs away from the spine and pulling the lungs out through the back, spreading them like wings. Men did not die quickly from the Blood Eagle. They died in agony that lasted hours. "Oh, you cannot," Ayla whispered. "You would not. No civilized people would—" "You killed our father," Ivar interrupted. "You sent a messenger to brag about it. You thought we were too weak or too divided to respond. You thought wrong. This is what happens when you underestimate the sons of Ragnar Lodbrok." The execution took place in front of the assembled armies, Viking and English alike. The captured English soldiers were forced to watch as their king died screaming, his lungs exposed to the cold air, his body breaking under a pain no human should endure. It took hours. When it was finally over, when Ayla's corpse lay in the blood-stained snow, the Vikings let out a roar that echoed across the battlefield. Ragnar Lodbrok had been avenged. That night, the great heathen army celebrated in captured York. The city had opened its gates without further resistance once word of Ayla's death spread. The Vikings poured into the streets, claiming houses and treasuries, drinking English wine and eating English food. They had done what they came to do. They had conquered kingdoms and executed the man who killed their father. Ivar sat in what had been Ayla's throne room, now claimed as his own command center. His brothers were celebrating with the warriors, getting drunk and accepting praise. But Ivar felt no joy, no sense of completion. He had achieved what he set out to achieve. His father was avenged. The invasion was succeeding beyond anyone's wildest expectations. So why did it feel hollow? Freydis found him there, alone, in the empty hall. She sat down on the steps leading up to the throne and looked at him carefully. "You won," she said. "You avenged your father. You conquered 2 kingdoms. You proved that the crippled son of Ragnar could lead an army to victory. Why do you look like a man who has lost?" Ivar was quiet for a long time. "Because I'm trying to figure out what happens next," he said finally. "We came here for revenge. We got it. Now what? Do we go home and let England return to how it was? Do we stay and try to hold what we have taken? Do we keep conquering until there is nothing left to conquer? I do not know. And I do not know what will hold my brothers and me together now that the thing that united us is finished." "Maybe," Freydis said gently, "you should have thought about that before you carved a man's lungs out of his back." Ivar looked at her sharply, but she held his gaze. She was right, of course. He had been so focused on achieving revenge, on proving himself, on winning, that he had not thought about what victory would actually mean. He had conquered kingdoms, but he had no idea how to rule them. He had an army, but no clear purpose for it now that Ayla was dead. He had won. And winning, it turned out, was just the beginning of a much more complicated problem. The cracks in the alliance appeared within days of Ayla's execution. The brothers gathered in the Great Hall of York to discuss the future of their conquest, and almost immediately they began to argue about what that future should look like. "We should go home," Sigurd said. "We came for revenge. We got it. Ayla is dead. Father is avenged. What more is there to accomplish?" "What more?" Bjorn looked at him incredulously. "We have conquered 2 kingdoms. We have thousands of warriors who followed us here expecting land and wealth. You want to just abandon all of this and sail back to Kattegat?" "We cannot hold England," Sigurd argued. "Not permanently. We do not have enough men. The English will eventually unite against us, and when they do, we will be outnumbered 10 to 1. Better to leave while we are still victorious." Ubi shook his head. "Sigurd is partly right. We cannot conquer all of England, but we can hold what we have taken. East Anglia and Northumbria are ours now. We establish settlements, bring families from Scandinavia, create a permanent Norse presence here. That is what Father would have wanted. Not just raids, but real conquest. "And who rules these settlements?" Fitzurk asked. It was the question everyone had been avoiding. "We are 5 brothers, 2 kingdoms. Someone is going to be left out." The hall went quiet. This was the fundamental problem that had been lurking beneath the surface of their alliance from the beginning. As long as they were united in purpose, avenging Ragnar, conquering England, the question of who actually held power could be postponed. But now that the immediate goals were achieved, the question demanded an answer. Bjorn stood up and walked to the center of the hall. "I am the eldest," he said. "By right, I should rule Northumbria. It is the largest kingdom, the most important. The rest of you can divide East Anglia however you want." "By right?" Ivar's voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a blade. "What right is that, brother? The right of being born first? The right of being able to walk, or perhaps the right of having done the actual work of conquering these kingdoms?" Bjorn's face flushed red. "I led the warriors. I fought in every battle. What did you do besides sit in your litter and give orders?" "I won the battles before they started," Ivar replied calmly. "I chose where we landed, when we attacked, how we defeated armies twice our size. I made the strategy that turned Ella's arrogance into his downfall. You swung a sword, Bjorn. Anyone can swing a sword. Not everyone can see 3 moves ahead and turn enemy strengths into weaknesses." "Are you saying you should rule Northumbria?" Bjorn demanded. "I am saying that whoever rules should be the one best suited for it, not the one who happened to come out of mother's womb first." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. The other brothers watched nervously, sensing that this argument was about more than just territory. It was about years of accumulated resentment, about the fundamental question of what made a man worthy of leadership. Ubi stepped between them. "We are not going to solve this by shouting at each other. We need to think about this rationally. What is best for the army? What is best for our position in England? What is best for Father's legacy?" "Father's legacy?" Sigurd laughed bitterly. "Father is dead. His legacy is whatever we decide it is, and right now we are deciding that his sons cannot even agree on how to divide the spoils of their victory." "Then maybe we should not divide them," Fitzurk suggested. "Maybe we rule together, all 5 of us as a council. No single king, but a shared authority." "That is a terrible idea," Ivar said. "Rule by committee never works. Someone always has to make the final decision. And if we all have equal authority, we will spend more time arguing than actually governing. We need a clear hierarchy, or this whole thing will collapse." "A hierarchy with you at the top, I suppose," Bjorn said. "If that is what works best, yes." The room erupted. Bjorn shouted that he would not take orders from a cripple. Sigurd accused Ivar of manipulating everyone from the beginning. Fitzurk tried to calm things down and only made them worse. Ubi stood to the side watching the alliance fracture in real time. Finally, Ivar raised his voice, not shouting but projecting with enough force that everyone stopped to listen. "You want to know the truth. The warriors do not follow Bjorn. They do not follow Ube or Fitzurk or Sigurd. They follow orders that work. They follow strategy that wins battles. They follow the person who keeps them alive and makes them rich. Right now, that person is me. You all know it. The warriors know it. The only ones who seem confused about it are you." "You arrogant—" Bjorn started forward, his hand on his knife. Ubi grabbed his arm. "Stop, both of you. This is exactly what our enemies want. If we tear ourselves apart, if we cannot hold this alliance together, then everything we have accomplished means nothing." Ivar looked at Bjorn with an expression that was hard to read. "I am not trying to take anything from you, brother. I am trying to make you understand reality. You are a warrior, the best warrior among us. You should lead warriors. But leading warriors is not the same as ruling kingdoms. That requires different skills. Skills that, whether you like it or not, I possess more than anyone else in this room. Bjorn jerked his arm free from Ubbe's grip. I need air, he said, and stalked out of the hall. Hvitserk followed him, always drawn to whoever seemed most upset. Sigurd lingered for a moment, glaring at Ivar, then left as well. Only Ubbe remained. He sat down across from Ivar and studied his youngest brother carefully. You handled that poorly, he said. I spoke the truth. The truth delivered badly is worse than a lie delivered well. Bjorn is not an idiot. He knows you are right, but you humiliated him in front of everyone. You made him look weak. That is not how you build alliances. I am tired of managing Bjorn's ego, Ivar said. I am tired of pretending that physical strength matters more than intelligence. We are trying to rule kingdoms, not win drinking contests. Someone needs to be honest about where power actually lies. Ubbe sighed. You sound more like father every day. He was brilliant and ruthless and completely incapable of understanding why people did not just do what he told them to do. It cost him allies, Ivar. It cost him opportunities. Do not make the same mistakes. What would you have me do? Pretend that Bjorn should rule because he is the eldest? Watch him make decisions that get people killed because he thinks with his muscles instead of his brain? I would have you remember that we need each other, Ubbe said. You are right that the warriors follow orders that work, but warriors also need someone to believe in. Bjorn gives them that. He is the hero they can understand, the leader they can see themselves in. You give them victories, but victories alone do not inspire loyalty. You need Bjorn even if you do not want to admit it. Ivar was quiet for a long time. He hated that Ubbe was right. He hated that intelligence and strategy were not enough, that leadership also required something he had never learned how to provide, the ability to make people feel something beyond respect or fear. What do you suggest? Ivar asked finally. A compromise. Bjorn rules Northumbria in name. He is the public face, the warrior king that people can rally around. But you advise him on strategy and governance. You make the actual decisions, but you let him announce them. He gets the glory, you get the power. It is not ideal for either of you, but it might keep us from killing each other. And what about you? What about Hvitserk and Sigurd? Hvitserk does not want to rule anything. He just wants to follow someone who seems to know what they are doing. Sigurd, Ubbe paused. Sigurd is more complicated. He resents you too much to work with you willingly. But if Bjorn and I support this arrangement, he will have to accept it or leave. And I do not think he will leave. He wants to be part of this success too much. Ivar considered the proposal. It was not what he wanted. He wanted clear, unambiguous authority. He wanted recognition for the work he had done, the strategy he had created, the victories he had won. But Ubbe was right. He needed his brothers, at least for now. The warriors might follow his orders, but they loved Bjorn. And love, as much as Ivar hated to admit it, mattered. All right, Ivar said. We try it your way. Bjorn rules Northumbria publicly. I control strategy privately. You manage East Anglia and keep the Jarls happy. Hvitserk handles logistics. Sigurd can coordinate with the fleet and manage our supply lines back to Scandinavia. Everyone has a role. Everyone has authority in their domain. And when decisions need to be made that affect everyone, we counsel together. But if there is a deadlock, my decision stands. On matters of strategy and war, I have final authority. Non-negotiable. Ubbe nodded slowly. I can work with that. Now you just need to convince Bjorn. That proved more difficult than Ivar had anticipated. Bjorn spent 3 days brooding in the old Roman fortress outside York, surrounded by loyal warriors who fed his resentment and encouraged his pride. When Ivar finally sent a messenger asking him to return for another council, Bjorn sent back a one-word response: no. So Ivar went to him. It was the first time Ivar had voluntarily gone to Bjorn, rather than summoning him. His bearers carried him through the ruins of the fortress to where Bjorn sat drinking with a group of warriors. The men fell silent as Ivar approached, sensing that something important was about to happen. "I need to speak with you," Ivar said. "Alone." Bjorn took a long drink from his horn, then gestured for the warriors to leave. They filed out reluctantly, clearly hoping to witness whatever confrontation was coming. When they were gone, Bjorn looked at his younger brother with an expression somewhere between hostility and exhaustion. "Come to gloat?" Bjorn asked. "Come to make peace," Ivar replied. "We cannot keep doing this, Bjorn. We cannot keep tearing at each other while trying to hold kingdoms together. It does not work." "Then stop undermining me. Stop making me look like a fool in front of the warriors." "I never tried to make you look like a fool. I tried to be honest about our respective strengths, but I see now that honesty without tact is just cruelty. I apologize for that." Bjorn blinked, clearly not expecting an apology. "You are apologizing. For how I said things, yes. Not for what I said. You are the best warrior among us. I could not do what you do. Lead men into battle, inspire them through personal courage, make them believe victory is possible even when it seems impossible. Those are real skills, important skills. I should have acknowledged that instead of dismissing it." "But," Bjorn said, hearing the unspoken qualifier, "but you are not a strategist. You see the battle in front of you, not the war beyond it. You think about honor and glory, not logistics and consequences. Those are my strengths. Together we are formidable. Separately we are incomplete." Bjorn set down his drinking horn. "You want us to work together, with you making the plans and me executing them. With you ruling Northumbria, and me advising you. With you as the king the people see and respect, and me as the advisor who handles the complicated parts. You get the glory. I get the satisfaction of seeing my strategies succeed. We both win. Why should I trust you? You have made it clear you think I am an idiot. I do not think you are an idiot. I think you are brilliant at what you do. I just think that what you do and what I do are different things, and we need both. As for trust," Ivar paused, "I am trusting you with this conversation. I came here, to your territory, surrounded by your loyal men. If you wanted to kill me and take sole control, this would be the moment. But you will not. Because despite everything, we are brothers. And because you know deep down that you need me as much as I need you." Bjorn studied him for a long moment. "You really believe that? That we need each other?" "Yes. You are the face of our conquest. I am the mind behind it. Remove either one and the whole thing falls apart. I do not like that any more than you do, but it is the truth." Bjorn stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the snow-covered landscape. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "Father used to say that the hardest battles are not with enemies, but with the people on your own side. He said that keeping allies together was harder than defeating opponents. He was right. I miss him," Bjorn said suddenly. "I miss being able to ask him what to do. He would know how to handle this, how to balance pride and practicality, how to lead without destroying the people who follow you. He would tell you to be pragmatic," Ivar said. "He would tell you that ruling is about results, not feelings. He would tell you to work with me, because working with me gives you the best chance of success." Bjorn turned around. "All right, I will rule Northumbria. You will advise me. But in public, you show me respect. You do not contradict me in front of the warriors. You do not make me look weak. If you have criticisms or suggestions, you bring them to me privately. Can you do that?" "Yes," Ivar said. "I can do that." "And when I make decisions you disagree with?" "I will tell you why I disagree, and then I will accept your decision, unless it is a matter of military strategy that could get people killed. In those cases, I will insist on my way. But everything else? Your kingdom, your choice." Bjorn nodded slowly. Then we have an agreement." He walked over and extended his hand. Ivar took it, and they clasped forearms in the traditional warrior greeting. It was not friendship exactly. It was something more complicated, a mutual recognition of dependence and acceptance of reality, a truce between two very different kinds of strength. When Ivar returned to York, Ubbe was waiting. "Did it work?" he asked. "It worked. Bjorn will rule Northumbria. I will advise. We will try not to kill each other. That is the best we can hope for, I suppose." Ubbe smiled slightly. "Welcome to the complicated world of politics, brother, where winning the war is easier than managing the peace." Ivar looked around the hall, at the kingdom they had conquered, at the future they were trying to build. Ubbe was right. The hard part was just beginning. They had defeated external enemies. Now they had to manage internal ones. Ego, resentment, ambition, pride. All the things that destroyed alliances from within. But Ivar had spent his life overcoming obstacles that should have destroyed him. He had survived being born with a body that did not work in a society that valued physical strength above all else. He had turned weakness into power, exclusion into authority, contempt into command. Surely he could manage his own brothers. Surely he could hold together what they had built. Surely intelligence and will could overcome the messy complications of human emotion. He would learn in time that some problems could not be solved with strategy alone. But for now, in this moment, he believed he could control everything. And that belief, more than anything else, would define what came next. The nightmares began a month after Ayala's execution. Ivar would wake in the darkness, his body drenched in sweat, the phantom sensation of snakes crawling across his skin. In the dreams, he was the one in the pit, not Ayala. He was the one being bitten, feeling venom burn through his veins, screaming songs that no one could hear. He would wake gasping, disoriented, reaching for weapons he could not hold. He told no one about the dreams. Weakness, even in sleep, was something to be hidden, but the dreams revealed something that Ivar had spent his life trying to ignore. Beneath the cold calculation, beneath the strategic brilliance, beneath the iron control, there was fear. Fear of becoming what his father had become. Fear of ending like Ayala had ended. Fear that all his intelligence and planning would eventually fail, and he would be left helpless, broken, destroyed. The fear manifested as obsession with control. Every detail of governance in Northumbria had to pass through Ivar's scrutiny. Every decision, every appointment, every allocation of resources. Bjorn might wear the crown and sit on the throne, but Ivar held the reins of actual power so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "You are working too much," Ubbe told him one evening. They were in Ivar's chambers, surrounded by maps and reports and supply manifests. "You need to delegate. Trust other people to handle some of this." "I do trust other people," Ivar replied, without looking up from a document detailing grain stores in East Anglia. "I trust them to be incompetent unless I supervise them closely." That is not trust. That is paranoia. Paranoia is just pattern recognition applied to human behavior. People are unreliable. They make mistakes. They prioritize their own interests over the collective good. If I do not control everything, things fall apart. Ubbe sat down across from him. "Listen to yourself. You sound like a man who believes he is the only competent person in the world. That is not healthy, Ivar. That is the thinking of someone who is heading toward a very dark place." "I am already in a dark place," Ivar said. "I have been there since birth. The difference is that now I have power in that darkness. I control it instead of letting it control me." "Do you, though? Because from where I sit, it looks like the darkness is controlling you. You barely sleep. You barely eat. You snap at anyone who questions your decisions. You are turning into a tyrant, and tyrants eventually destroy themselves." Ivar finally looked up, his eyes cold. Better a living tyrant than a dead philosopher. I have seen what happens to people who are too weak to seize control. They get thrown into pits of snakes. They get trampled by men who are willing to do what they are not. I will not be one of those people. No one is asking you to be weak. We are asking you to be human. Human? Ivar laughed, a sound without humor. I stopped being human the moment I was born with legs that do not work. I became something else, something that had to be smarter, more ruthless, more willing to do terrible things in order to survive. That is what I am. That is all I will ever be. Ubbi left without another word. There was nothing more to say. Ivar had built walls around himself so high that no one could reach over them. Not his brothers, not his advisors, not even the few people who genuinely cared about him. He was alone inside his own mind, and he preferred it that way. Alone meant safe. Alone meant no one could betray him or disappoint him or prove that he had made the mistake of trusting them. But isolation came with costs. The Jarls who had followed him to England began to whisper among themselves. Ivar the Boneless was brilliant, yes, but he was also impossible to work with. He demanded perfection and punished failure with a cruelty that went beyond practical deterrence. When a supply captain lost 3 ships to a storm, Ivar had him executed publicly as an example. When a scout brought back incomplete information about Mercian troop movements, Ivar had him stripped of his position and exiled. The message was clear. Failure was not tolerated. Mistakes were punished. Only perfection was acceptable. The warriors respected him, but they also feared him, and fear without respect eventually curdles into resentment. Ivar knew this on an intellectual level. He understood human psychology better than almost anyone, but understanding and caring were different things. He needed obedience more than he needed affection. He needed results more than he needed loyalty built on genuine connection. The obsession with perfection extended to his own body. Ivar began experimenting with different ways to improve his mobility. He commissioned craftsmen to build elaborate wheeled chairs that would let him move without bearers. He consulted with healers and mystics, looking for treatments that might strengthen his bones or ease the constant pain that lived in his spine. None of it worked. His body remained broken, and every reminder of that fact fueled his determination to prove that the body did not matter. "You are trying to fix something that cannot be fixed," Freydis told him one afternoon. She had traveled to York with a group of settlers from Kattegat, and she had sought Ivar out immediately. She found him in the workshop where craftsmen were building his latest wheeled contraption. "I am not trying to fix my body," Ivar replied. "I am trying to work around it." "There is a difference." "Is there? Because from here it looks like you are spending enormous amounts of time and resources trying to overcome a limitation that you have already overcome. You conquered kingdoms without being able to walk. What more do you need to prove?" "Everything," Ivar said simply. "I need to prove everything every day because the moment I stop proving it, people will remember that I am a cripple. They will start to doubt. They will start to think that maybe their respect was misplaced, that maybe they should follow someone who can actually stand on his own." Freydis knelt down so she could look him in the eyes. "You think your power comes from proving yourself, but power that requires constant proof is not real power. Real power is when people follow you even when you show weakness. Real power is when you do not have to be perfect to be respected." "Then I will never have real power," Ivar said, "because I cannot afford to show weakness, ever. The moment I do, everything I have built collapses. And what are you building exactly? A kingdom, an empire, or a prison made of your own fear?" The question struck deeper than Ivar wanted to admit. What was he building? He had started with a simple goal: avenge his father, prove his worth, show the world that a broken body did not mean a broken mind. But somewhere along the way, The goals had shifted. It was no longer about proving himself. It was about control, about making sure that every variable was accounted for, every risk mitigated, every possibility of failure eliminated. It was, he realized, impossible. The world was too chaotic, too unpredictable, too full of variables that could not be controlled. But admitting that meant admitting that his entire approach to life was flawed, and Ivar could not do that. To admit flaw was to admit weakness. To admit weakness was to invite destruction. So he doubled down. He worked harder, slept less, demanded more. He reviewed every report personally, questioned every decision made by his subordinates, second-guessed every judgment call. The kingdom ran with brutal efficiency, but the cost was measured in the exhaustion of everyone around him. His brothers noticed the change. Bjorn, who had initially been grateful for Ivar's strategic guidance, began to resent the constant oversight. "You agreed I would rule Northumbria," Bjorn said during one particularly heated argument, "but you will not let me make any decisions without your approval. What is the point of being king if I am just a puppet for your paranoia? The point is that you get to be king without making mistakes that get people killed," Ivar shot back. "You wanted the crown. Fine. But the crown comes with responsibility, and responsibility means doing things correctly, which you cannot seem to manage without supervision." The fights became more frequent. Bjorn would make a decision, Ivar would overturn it, Bjorn would explode in anger, and Ubbe would have to mediate before things escalated to violence. The pattern repeated weekly, then daily, until the very act of governance became a battle between the brothers. Sigurd watched all of this with barely concealed satisfaction. He had always resented Ivar, and now he saw that resentment vindicated. "You are destroying this alliance," Sigurd told Ivar one night. "You are so obsessed with control that you cannot see you are pushing everyone away. Bjorn hates you. Ubbe is exhausted trying to keep peace. Even Vitzerk is starting to question whether following you was a mistake." "Let them question," Ivar replied. "As long as they obey, their feelings do not matter. But they do matter, because eventually, obedience without respect turns into rebellion. And when that happens, all your brilliant strategy will not save you. You cannot think your way out of everyone hating you." The words stung because they were true. Ivar knew he was losing the goodwill of his brothers, his jarls, even the common warriors. But he did not know how to stop. Control was the only thing that kept the fear at bay. The moment he loosened his grip, the moment he trusted others to carry their share of the burden, everything would fall apart. He was certain of it. The certainty came from a deep place, a place formed in childhood when he had learned that the world was hostile to weakness, that survival required constant vigilance, that no one could be trusted to protect him except himself. That child was still inside him, still controlling his decisions, still whispering that any moment of vulnerability would be exploited. "You are becoming what you hate," Ubbe told him during yet another late-night conversation. "You hated being powerless, so you became tyrannical. You hated being dismissed, so you dismiss everyone else. You hated being underestimated, so now you underestimate everyone around you. You are turning into the mirror image of every person who ever hurt you." "Good," Ivar said. "Better to be the tyrant than the victim. Those are not the only two options. You could be a leader. You could be someone people follow because they believe in you, not because they fear what happens if they do not. You could build something that lasts beyond fear and control. That is naive. Fear and control are the only things that work. Everything else is fantasy told by people who have never had to fight for their survival every single day of their lives." Ubbe looked at his youngest brother with something that might have been pity. "You did survive, Ivar. You survived and you conquered, and you proved everyone wrong. But you are still fighting like you are that powerless child in Kattegat. You won. When are you going to start acting like it? The question haunted Ivar. When would he start acting like he had won? When would the fear subside? When would the need for constant control relax? The answer, he suspected, was never. He was too damaged, too warped by years of survival, too convinced that the moment he stopped fighting was the moment he would be destroyed. The psychology of a tyrant, Ivar realized, was not about being evil or cruel for its own sake. It was about fear, deep, primal fear that never went away, that could only be managed through absolute control. Every harsh decision, every ruthless punishment, every refusal to delegate or trust, all of it came from the same source. The terrified child who had learned that the world wanted him dead, and the only way to stay alive was to control every variable, eliminate every threat, trust no one completely. He looked at himself in a polished bronze mirror one night and barely recognized the reflection. The face staring back was harder than he remembered, colder, carved from years of calculated cruelty. This was what survival had cost. This was what he had become in order to live in a world that did not want him. Was it worth it? He asked the reflection. The reflection had no answer, or perhaps the answer was in the question itself. The fact that he had to ask meant something had been lost along the way, something that could not be calculated or strategized or controlled, something human. But humanity was a luxury for people who could afford weakness. Ivar could not afford it. He never had been able to, and he never would be. So he turned away from the mirror, returned to his maps and reports, and endless planning. The work never stopped. The fear never stopped. The need for control never stopped. And somewhere in that cycle, Ivar the Boneless stopped being a person and became a function, the strategic mind of an empire, brilliant and brutal and utterly alone. His brothers saw it. His warriors saw it. Everyone who worked with him saw the transformation, but no one knew how to stop it, not even Ivar himself. The tyrant was not born in a single moment. He was forged slowly, decision by decision, fear by fear, until the boy who had dragged himself across the training yard in Kattegat became the man who ruled kingdoms from a litter in York. The body had never healed, but the mind had grown sharp enough to cut anyone who came too close, including, eventually, himself. The first city burned on a Tuesday in spring. Ivar had not ordered it burned. That was the problem. A group of warriors under Bjorn's command had gotten drunk and decided to raid a Saxon village that had been late paying its tribute. The raid escalated. Houses caught fire, people died. By the time word reached York, the village was ash, and the survivors were fleeing south to tell stories about Viking brutality. Ivar summoned Bjorn to the throne room. His brother arrived still smelling of smoke and mead, his face flushed with a combination of alcohol and defiance. He knew he was in trouble, but he did not look particularly concerned about it. "You burned a village," Ivar said without preamble. "A village that was under our protection, a village whose tribute we were collecting. You destroyed our own asset." "They were late with their payments," Bjorn replied. "We needed to send a message." "The message you sent is that Vikings cannot be trusted to honor agreements, that even when Saxons submit and pay tribute, we will burn them anyway. Do you understand what that does to our position? Every other village is now wondering if cooperation means anything. Some of them are going to stop paying. Some are going to flee. Some are going to send messages to Mercia and Wessex begging for protection. You just undermined months of work with one drunken raid. It was not just me. 20 warriors were involved, and you were their leader. You set the example. If you act like a raider instead of a ruler, they will too." Bjorn's jaw clenched. "I am tired of your lectures, Ivar. I am tired of being told that every decision I make is wrong. I am the king of Northumbria. I should not have to justify my actions to you. You are the king of Northumbria because I put you there. Ivar said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "And if you cannot handle the responsibilities that come with that title, I can take it away just as easily." The room went silent. Several warriors who had been standing guard near the door shifted uncomfortably. This was the kind of confrontation that could split the entire army, and everyone knew it. Bjorn stared at his younger brother, his hand moving toward his weapon. "You think you can threaten me?" Bjorn said quietly. "I do not threaten. I state facts. The warriors follow whoever gives them victory and wealth. Right now that is me. You are useful as a symbol, as someone they can admire and drink with and follow into battle. But symbols can be replaced. If you become more trouble than you are worth, I will find another symbol." Bjorn took a step forward. Ivar did not move from his seat. For a moment, violence hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Then Ubi entered the room, saw what was happening, and positioned himself between his brothers. "Enough," Ubi said firmly. "Both of you. Bjorn, you made a mistake. Acknowledge it and figure out how to fix it. Ivar, stop treating our brother like an incompetent subordinate. We are supposed to be working together." "We are working together," Ivar said. "Bjorn does what I tell him to do, and I make sure we do not all die from his impulsive stupidity." Bjorn lunged. Ubi caught him barely, and several guards rushed forward to help restrain him. Bjorn was shouting, incoherent with rage, struggling against the men holding him back. Ivar watched with an expression that revealed nothing. "Get him out of here," Ivar told the guards. "Take him to the barracks. Let him cool down before he does something that cannot be undone." They dragged Bjorn out, still fighting, still shouting threats and insults. When the door closed behind them, Ubi turned to Ivar with a look of profound exhaustion. "You are going to get yourself killed," Ubi said. "You cannot keep pushing him like this. Eventually, he is going to snap. And when he does, I will not be able to stop him. If he snaps, then he proves he is not fit to rule. Problem solved." "The problem is not solved. The problem is that our alliance is falling apart because you cannot stop yourself from being cruel. You won every battle we fought in England, but you are losing the only battle that actually matters, keeping your brothers on your side." Ivar turned away, dismissing Ubi with the gesture. He did not want to hear this. He did not want to confront the possibility that his methods were destroying the very thing he was trying to build. It was easier to focus on external threats, on Saxon resistance and Mercian armies and supply chain problems. Those were concrete issues that could be solved with strategy and force. The emotional damage he was inflicting on his relationships with his brothers was messier, harder to quantify, impossible to control. The burned village was only the first. Over the following months, more incidents followed. A Jarl executed for questioning Ivar's decision about troop deployments. A group of Saxon nobles imprisoned for being suspected, not proven, but suspected, of planning rebellion. A Viking warrior flogged in the town square for stealing from a supply wagon, with Ivar watching impassively from his litter. The kingdom that Ivar was building ran on fear. Fear that kept people in line. Fear that ensured obedience. Fear that prevented the chaos that Ivar was certain would emerge the moment he loosened his grip. And for a time, it worked. The tribute flowed into York. The Saxon population remained mostly subdued. The warriors stayed under control, if not entirely content. But fear has diminishing returns. What starts as deterrence eventually becomes oppression. What begins as strict governance eventually becomes tyranny. And tyranny, by its nature, creates the very resistance it seeks to prevent. The first real rebellion happened in a town called Durham, about 30 miles north of York. A Saxon thane named Oswulf had been paying his tribute faithfully for months, but he had also been quietly organizing. He had contacted other thanes, gathered weapons, trained men in secret, and one morning when a group of Vikings came to collect the tribute, Oswulf and his men killed them all. The news reached York within hours. Ivar's response was immediate and brutal. He sent Bjorn with 500 warriors to Durham with explicit orders. Kill every fighting-age man in the town, enslave the women and children, burn the buildings to the ground. Make an example so horrific that no one would ever consider rebellion again. Bjorn carried out the orders. The massacre took most of a day. When it was over, Durham was a smoking ruin populated only by corpses and crows. Survivors who managed to escape spread the story across Northumbria. Oswulf the Thane had tried to resist the Vikings, and the Vikings had erased his entire town from the map. The strategy worked, in a way. No other towns openly rebelled after Durham, but the lesson the Saxons learned was not the one Ivar had intended to teach. They did not learn that resistance was futile. They learned that the Vikings were monsters who could not be reasoned with, who would slaughter entire populations for the sins of a few. The lesson bred not obedience but hatred, deep, burning hatred that would wait years if necessary for a chance at revenge. "You are creating a legacy of terror," Freydis told Ivar when she heard about Durham. "Is that really what you want? To be remembered as the man who burned England?" "I want to be remembered as the man who conquered England," Ivar replied. "What methods I used will be forgotten. Only the results will remain. That is not how history works. The methods define the results. A kingdom built on terror will never be stable. It will always be one crisis away from collapse. Then I will manage the crises. I will put out every fire, crush every rebellion, eliminate every threat. That is what ruling means. That is what tyranny means. And tyrants never die peacefully in their beds, Ivar. They die violently, betrayed by the very people they tried to control. Is that the ending you want?" Ivar had no answer. Or rather, he had an answer but did not want to speak it aloud. Yes, if he was being honest, that was probably the ending he would get. He was too ruthless, too willing to sacrifice everything for control, too incapable of building relationships based on anything except fear and utility. He could see the trajectory clearly: increasing isolation, growing resentment, eventual betrayal. It was almost mathematical in its inevitability, but knowing the future and being able to change it were different things. Ivar could not soften. He could not show mercy without feeling like he was showing weakness. He could not trust without fearing betrayal. He was trapped in patterns that had been formed in childhood, patterns that had kept him alive but would eventually kill him. The kingdom of bones and fire grew. More towns submitted. More Saxons paid tribute. More warriors arrived from Scandinavia, seeking land and wealth in the conquered territories. From the outside, it looked like success. The great heathen army controlled most of northern England. Jarls were establishing settlements. Norse families were building farms and shops. The invasion that had seemed impossible 3 years ago had become a permanent occupation. But inside the power structure, everything was rotting. Bjorn barely spoke to Ivar anymore, except when absolutely necessary. Sigurd had stopped attending councils entirely, claiming illness but really just avoiding his younger brother. Ivitzerk drank more and thought less, becoming a shadow of whatever potential he might have had. Only Ubbi remained engaged, and even he was exhausted from constantly mediating conflicts and trying to hold together an alliance that wanted to tear itself apart. The warriors noticed. They saw the tension between the brothers, saw the growing cruelty of Ivar's governance, saw the way fear had replaced respect as the foundation of power. Some of them began to question whether following the sons of Ragnar to England had been a mistake. They had been promised glory and wealth, and they had received both. But they had also received something else, a kingdom ruled by paranoia, where loyalty was suspect and mercy was weakness. Late one night, Ivar sat alone in his chambers, looking at maps of England. He had marked the territories they controlled, the territories they might conquer next, the potential threats from Mercia and Wessex. Everything was there on the vellum: roads and rivers, cities and fortresses, all the information needed to plan the next phase of conquest. But as he stared at the maps, Ivar realized something that sent a chill through him, despite the fire burning in the hearth. He was mapping territories, but he had lost the map of human relationships. He knew where every Saxon army was positioned, but he had no idea what his own brothers were thinking. He could predict enemy movements with uncanny accuracy, but he could not predict when his own alliance would fracture completely. The Kingdom of Bones and Fire was exactly that, a structure built from violence and maintained by fear, impressive in its extent, but hollow at its core. And hollow things, no matter how large they grew, eventually collapsed under their own weight. Freydis found him there, still staring at the maps, as dawn light began to creep through the windows. She said nothing at first, just sat down across from him and waited. Finally, without looking up, Ivar spoke. "I have conquered 2 kingdoms," he said quietly. "I have built an empire. I have proven that a broken body is no barrier to greatness. So why does it feel like I have lost everything that actually mattered?" "Because you have," Freydis replied gently. "You won the war, but you lost yourself in the winning." Ivar finally looked at her. His face was haggard, aged beyond his years by stress and sleeplessness and the constant weight of control. For just a moment, the mask slipped. For just a moment, he was not Ivar the Boneless, the brilliant strategist, the ruthless commander. He was just a young man who had fought so hard to prove his worth that he had forgotten to ask whether the thing he was proving was actually worth having. "I do not know how to be anything else," he admitted. "This is all I know. This is all I am." Then learn something new, before it is too late, before you have conquered the whole world and realized you are ruling it alone. But learning something new required changing, and change required admitting that his current approach was flawed. And Ivar the Boneless, the man who had turned weakness into strength through sheer force of will, could not admit flaw, not to others, not even to himself. So the Kingdom of Bones and Fire continued to grow, built on the ruins of what might have been, ruled by a king who could not walk and could not bend, brilliant and broken and utterly alone in his cold stone hall, mapping conquests he would never enjoy, planning victories that would never feel like winning. The alliance finally shattered on a morning in late autumn, 869. It happened not in battle, but in words spoken in a moment of exhaustion and rage. Ivar and Sigurd had been arguing about supply routes for over an hour. The argument was technical, pointless, the kind of dispute that would have been resolved in minutes if either brother had been willing to compromise, but neither was willing. Sigurd saw every disagreement as an opportunity to challenge Ivar's authority. Ivar saw every challenge as a threat that had to be crushed. "You are impossible," Sigurd said finally, his voice shaking with frustration. "Nothing is ever good enough for you. Every decision has to be perfect. Every plan has to be yours. You cannot let anyone else have a single moment of authority without undermining them. If people made better decisions, I would not have to correct them constantly," Ivar replied. "No, you would just find other reasons to control them. Because that is what you do, Ivar. You control, you manipulate, you twist everything until you are at the center and everyone else is dancing to your tune. I am sick of it. We are all sick of it. Then leave. No one is forcing you to stay. Maybe I will. Maybe we all will. Maybe you can rule your kingdom of ashes alone, since that is clearly what you want. To be the only voice that matters, the only mind that counts. King of nothing, ruling over dust." The words hung in the air. Other people in the room, advisors, guards, servants, pretended not to hear, but everyone was listening. This was the kind of argument that could not be taken back, the kind that changed everything. Ivar's face went cold. "Careful, brother. You are speaking to your commander. You are not my commander. You are a cripple who thinks that being clever makes up for not being able to stand. You are not father. You will never be father. You are just a broken boy who got lucky and convinced everyone that weakness could be strength. But I see through it. I always have." The room froze. No one moved. No one breathed. Sigurd had crossed a line that everyone knew existed, but no one ever spoke about. He had struck at the core of Ivar's identity, the wound that had never healed, the fundamental truth that Ivar had built his entire life trying to overcome. Ivar picked up an axe that was lying on the table. His movements were calm, almost casual. He tested the weight of the weapon in his hand, as if considering whether it was well made. Then he looked at Sigurd. "Say that again," Ivar said quietly. Sigurd's face paled. He had seen Ivar angry before, but this was different. This was cold and controlled and terrifying. "Ivar, I did not mean—" "Say it again. Tell me again that I am just a broken boy. Tell me again that I am not father. Tell me that what I have accomplished means nothing because I cannot walk. Say it." "Brother, please." Ivar threw the axe. His aim was terrible. He had never trained with weapons, had never developed the muscle memory that came from years of practice. The axe tumbled through the air awkwardly, off balance. It should have missed by feet, but luck or fate or the gods had other plans. The axe blade caught Sigurd in the chest, right below the collarbone. The impact drove him backward. He hit the wall and slid down, leaving a streak of red on the stone. His hands went to the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, but the damage was too severe. The axe had severed something vital. Sigurd looked at Ivar with an expression of complete shock. "You killed me," he said, his voice already weakening. "You actually killed me." "You told me to," Ivar replied. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "You pushed and pushed until something broke. Now you get to see what breaks when you push Ivar the Boneless too far." Sigurd tried to speak again, but blood filled his mouth. He coughed, choked, and then his eyes went distant. The life left him slowly, over the course of maybe 2 minutes. Everyone in the room watched it happen. No one moved to help. No one knew what to do. A son of Ragnar Lodbrok had just killed another son of Ragnar Lodbrok, and the implications were too enormous to process. When Sigurd finally stopped moving, Ivar looked around the room. "Someone remove the body," he said calmly. "And someone bring me Bjorn and Ubbi. We need to discuss succession." But Bjorn and Ubbi, when they arrived and heard what had happened, did not want to discuss succession. They wanted to know how their brother could have just killed their brother. They wanted to understand how an argument about supply routes had escalated to fratricide. They wanted answers that Ivar could not or would not give. "He insulted me," Ivar said, as if that explained everything. "He crossed a line." I responded. "That is how power works. That is how madness works," Bjorn said, his voice shaking with rage and grief. "Sigurd was our brother. He was family. You do not kill family over an insult. He stopped being family the moment he tried to undermine my authority in front of subordinates. He was a threat. I eliminated the threat. You would have done the same." "I would not have," Bjorn said, "because I am not you. I am not so paranoid and so damaged that I see every criticism as a mortal threat. You have lost your mind, Ivar. Whatever brilliance you once had, it has curdled into something poisonous." Ube said nothing. He just looked at the body of his brother, then at Ivar, then back at the body. His face was unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and tired. "I am done," Ube said. "I am done mediating. I am done trying to hold this family together. I am done pretending that what we have built is worth preserving. You can have Northumbria, Ivar. You can have York and all the territory we conquered. I am taking my people and leaving. I'm going to find somewhere that is not poisoned by your paranoia." "You cannot leave," Ivar said. "We have agreements. We have alliances. We have nothing," Ubi interrupted. "We had a family once. We had a shared purpose. But you destroyed all of that because you cannot see past your own fear. I hope your kingdom brings you everything you wanted. I hope it was worth losing all of us." Ube walked out. Bjorn followed him without a word. Hvitserk hesitated, looking at Ivar as if seeing him for the first time, then followed his brothers. Within hours, the news had spread throughout York. The sons of Ragnar had split. Ube and Bjorn were leaving, taking roughly half the army with them. They would sail to East Anglia, or perhaps to Ireland, or perhaps back to Scandinavia. Anywhere but here. Anywhere but under Ivar's command. Ivar sat in his throne room, now truly alone, and tried to feel something about what had just happened. Regret? Guilt? Sadness? But the emotions would not come. He had spent so long suppressing vulnerability, so many years training himself not to feel, that now when feeling might have been appropriate, he simply could not access it. He had killed his brother. His remaining brothers had abandoned him. The alliance that had conquered England had fallen apart. And Ivar felt nothing. Or perhaps he felt something so deeply buried that it could not reach the surface. A scream trapped inside, unable to escape, turning inward and poisoning everything it touched. The months that followed were strange and hollow. Ivar ruled Northumbria alone, making decisions without consultation, giving orders without explanation. The warriors who remained, about 2,000 men who either believed in him or had nowhere else to go, followed his commands with mechanical precision. They were efficient, they were obedient, they were joyless. The kingdom ran like a machine. Taxes were collected on schedule, roads were maintained. Justice was dispensed swiftly and harshly. Everything that could be controlled was controlled, and yet something essential was missing. The spark that made a kingdom more than just an administrative unit. The human element that transformed obedience into loyalty and fear into respect. Freydis stayed, though Ivar could not understand why. She was one of the few people who still spoke to him honestly, who did not treat every interaction as a potential trap. One evening, she found him in his chambers, staring at maps he no longer needed to study because he had memorized every detail months ago. "Why did you stay?" Ivar asked without looking up. "Because someone needs to witness what you become," Freydis said. "Someone needs to remember that you were more than this once, before the fear ate everything else. I was never more than this. This is who I have always been. That is a lie you tell yourself. I knew you when you were a boy in Kattegat. You were angry and brilliant and desperate to prove yourself, but you were not cruel. The cruelty came later. It was a choice you made, not an inevitability." "It was survival," Ivar said. "Everything I did was survival. At what cost? You survived, Ivar. You more than survived. You conquered, but you are completely alone. Your brothers are gone. Your allies fear you. Your enemies hate you. You have won everything and kept nothing. Was that really worth it?" Ivar finally looked at her. His face was gaunt, marked by sleepless nights and the weight of absolute power. "I do not know," he admitted. "I used to think I knew. I used to think that proving myself was all that mattered, but now I have proven myself beyond any doubt, and it feels like I have proven nothing at all, because proving yourself to others was never the point. You needed to prove it to yourself, and you never could, because you never forgave yourself for being born the way you were born. So no amount of victory will ever be enough. No amount of conquest will ever fill that hole." The words cut deeper than any insult Sigurd had thrown at him. Freydis was right. Ivar had spent his entire life trying to compensate for something that did not need compensation, trying to fix something that was not actually broken. His body was what it was. The only thing that made it a weakness was his own refusal to accept it, but acceptance would have required vulnerability, and vulnerability would have required trust, and trust would have required letting go of control, and Ivar the Boneless could not let go. He had held on so tightly for so long that his hands had cramped into claws, unable to release what they gripped, even when the thing they held was killing them. Winter came to Northumbria. The kingdom of bones and fire settled into a cold, efficient routine. Ivar governed from his hall in York, making decisions that kept the machinery running but built nothing lasting. He was maintaining an empire, not growing it, surviving, not thriving. Everything he had accused his brothers of being, reactive, defensive, fearful, he had become himself. News reached him occasionally about his brothers. Bjorn had sailed west, raiding the Mediterranean, seeking glory in distant lands. Ubi had settled in East Anglia, governing with a gentler hand than Ivar ever could, building alliances through diplomacy rather than fear. Hvitserk had disappeared into drinking and fighting, seeking oblivion in violence and mead. Each brother had responded to the fracture in his own way. Each had found a path forward. Each was moving on. Ivar remained in place, stuck, frozen. The boy who could not walk had become the man who could not move forward in any direction that mattered. He had conquered kingdoms, but could not conquer the fear inside himself. He had defeated armies, but could not defeat the voice that whispered he was broken, worthless, wrong. One night, sitting alone in his throne room, Ivar began to laugh. It started quietly, almost a chuckle. Then it grew louder, echoing off the stone walls, filling the empty space with a sound that was equal parts mirth and madness. He laughed at the absurdity of it all, that the crippled son of Ragnar Lodbrok had conquered England, only to discover that conquest meant nothing, that victory tasted like ashes, that proving everyone wrong had not made him right. The guards outside the throne room heard the laughter and exchanged worried glances. It was not the sound of joy. It was the sound of something breaking, something that had been held together by will and fear for too long, finally cracking under its own weight. Ivar laughed until tears ran down his face, laughed until his ribs hurt and his throat was raw, laughed at the cosmic joke of his own existence, that he had been given a brilliant mind in a broken body, and had spent that mind building an empire he could never enjoy, proving worth to people who would never love him, winning wars that left him utterly and completely alone. The laughter finally subsided into silence. Ivar sat in his throne, ruler of Northumbria, commander of thousands, conqueror of kingdoms, and felt the weight of everything he had sacrificed to get here. His family, his humanity, his capacity for connection, all of it traded for power that felt increasingly meaningless. Was it worth it? He whispered to the empty room. The room, like always, had no answer. The end came not with glory, but with whispers. Ivar the Boneless, conqueror of kingdoms, master strategist, the man who had turned weakness into power, died on a cold morning in the year 873. The details are murky, lost to time, and the fog of conflicting accounts. Some sources say he was killed in battle against Saxon rebels. Others claim he died of illness, his broken body finally surrendering to years of strain. A few suggest betrayal, a knife in the dark, delivered by warriors who had grown tired of his tyranny. What is certain is that he died young, perhaps 38 years old, and that he faced death the same way he had faced life, with defiance mixed with an exhaustion that ran deeper than bones. According to one account preserved in a saga written 2 centuries later, Ivar's final words were spoken to a priest who had been captured and brought before him. The priest had asked if Ivar feared judgment, if he worried about what awaited him after death. Ivar had looked at the priest with those cold, calculating eyes and said something that would be remembered long after his kingdoms crumbled. "I have been judged my entire life, by the gods who made me this way, by the people who looked at me and saw only what was broken, by my own brothers who could never see past the body to understand the mind. One more judgment changes nothing. I did what I did. I became what I became. Let history decide if I was monster or genius. I suspect I was both." Then he laughed, that same hollow laugh that had echoed through his throne room in York. And then he died. The aftermath was chaos. Without Ivar's iron control, Northumbria began to fracture almost immediately. Jarls who had been held in check by fear started fighting among themselves. Saxon nobles who had been subdued by terror began plotting rebellions. The machine that Ivar had built to run on absolute authority fell apart the moment that authority was removed. Within 5 years, the Norse hold on Northumbria had weakened significantly. Within 10 years, much of what Ivar had conquered had been retaken by Saxon kings. The great heathen army, which had seemed invincible under the brothers' united command, dispersed. Some warriors returned to Scandinavia. Others settled in the territories they had conquered, intermarrying with Saxons, gradually losing their Norse identity. The great invasion that had shocked England became, over time, just another chapter in the endless cycle of conquest and reconquest. But if Ivar's political legacy crumbled quickly, his mythological legacy grew stronger with each passing generation. People remembered him not as he actually was, complex, damaged, brilliant, cruel, but as a symbol, the crippled warrior who conquered kingdoms, the boneless man with an iron will, the strategist who could win battles without lifting a sword. The stories began almost immediately. Bards and skalds, the keepers of Viking oral tradition, started telling tales about Ivar the Boneless. Some stories were relatively accurate, recounting real events like the execution of King Aelle or the conquest of Northumbria. But accuracy was not the point. Entertainment was. Meaning was. And so the stories began to drift from fact toward legend. In some versions, Ivar could not walk because he was born of a union between his mother and a serpent, making him half god, half monster. In others, his inability to walk was a curse from the gods, punishment for his father's pride. Some stories claimed he was actually a berserker who felt no pain, whose disability was compensated by supernatural strength. Others said he was a master of magic, using Seder, the Norse mystical arts, to control minds and predict the future. The historical Ivar would have been darkly amused by these embellishments. He had spent his life proving that he did not need supernatural powers or divine intervention. His power had come from his mind, from careful observation and ruthless logic. But mythology does not care about such distinctions. Mythology takes the kernel of truth and grows it into something larger, something that serves the emotional needs of the people telling the story. The Saxons, for their part, remembered Ivar as a demon. In their chronicles, he was Ivar the Devil, a creature of such cruelty that even hardened warriors wept at the mention of his name. They described his invasion as the darkest period in English history, a time when pagans descended on Christian lands like locusts, destroying everything sacred. The Blood Eagle execution of King Aelle became a centerpiece of these accounts, a symbol of Viking barbarity that justified all future conflicts between the English and the Norse. But even in these hostile accounts, there was a grudging respect. The English chroniclers acknowledged that Ivar was brilliant. They admitted that his strategies were innovative, that his conquest was more complete than any previous Viking raid. They hated him, but they could not dismiss him. He had forced them to change their military tactics, to build better defenses, to think more carefully about how they organized their kingdoms. He had been a teacher through terror. The centuries passed. The Viking Age ended. Christianity spread throughout Scandinavia. The old gods faded into folklore, and still people told stories about Ivar the Boneless. The details became increasingly fantastical. He rode into battle on a shield carried by 8 men. He could kill with a glance. He made pacts with demons to gain strategic knowledge. He never slept, never ate, never showed mercy. These stories said more about the storytellers than about Ivar himself. Each generation projected onto him their own fears and fascinations. In times of war, he became a symbol of ruthless efficiency. In times of peace, he became a cautionary tale about the costs of ambition. For people with disabilities, he sometimes became an inspiration, proof that physical limitations did not have to define a person's potential. For others, he remained a monster, proof of what happens when someone compensates for perceived weakness with excessive cruelty. The truth, as always, was more complicated than any single interpretation. The historical Ivar was neither hero nor villain in any simple sense. He was a product of his circumstances, born into a society that valued physical prowess above all else, forced to develop alternative forms of power to survive. He was brilliant, and he was cruel. He was visionary, and he was paranoid. He achieved greatness, and he destroyed himself in the achieving. In the 20th century, archaeologists and historians began trying to separate fact from fiction. They examined Viking settlements in England, looking for evidence of the great heathen army. They studied Saxon chronicles, Norse sagas, and the fragmentary remains of the period. Slowly, a picture emerged of what the invasion might actually have been like. The army was real. Multiple sources confirmed its existence and its unprecedented size. The conquest of East Anglia and Northumbria was real. The execution of King Aelle, though perhaps not exactly as described in the sagas, almost certainly happened. And there was a leader named Ivar, associated with the invasion, who had some kind of physical condition that led to the nickname Boneless. But what that condition actually was remained uncertain. Some scholars suggested he had a form of osteogenesis imperfecta, brittle bone disease, which would have made his bones fragile and walking difficult or impossible. Others proposed he suffered from a spinal condition that affected his mobility. A few skeptics argued that boneless was a metaphor, perhaps referring to flexibility in negotiations, or an ability to slip through defenses like a serpent. The truth had been lost to time, obscured by centuries of embellishment. In the 21st century, popular culture rediscovered Ivar. Television shows, novels, and video games all featured versions of him. Some historically informed, others pure fantasy. He appeared as a character in a major historical drama series, portrayed as a complex figure, driven by ambition and insecurity, brilliant and brutal in equal measure. The show took liberties with history, but it captured something essential about the man: the way disability and genius intertwined, the way compensation for perceived weakness could drive someone to extraordinary achievements and terrible costs. Young people discovered Ivar through these modern retellings and became fascinated. They debated online about whether he was a villain or an anti-hero. They created art depicting him in various styles. They analyzed his strategies and wondered how accurate the portrayals were. Some people with disabilities found inspiration in his story, the idea that limitations could be overcome, that intelligence could triumph over physical weakness. Others worried that celebrating someone so cruel sent the wrong message. Historians watched these popular interpretations with mixed feelings. On one hand, renewed interest in the Viking Age was good for the field. bringing attention and funding to research. On the other hand, the fictionalized versions of Ivar diverged significantly from what could actually be known about him. The real Ivar was largely unknowable, a shadow moving through fragmentary sources, a name attached to events whose exact details had been lost or distorted. What could be said with confidence? That a man called Ivar, likely one of several sons of a Viking leader named Ragnar, participated in a large-scale invasion of England in the late 8th century. That this invasion was unusually successful, conquering multiple kingdoms and establishing Norse control over significant territory. That Ivar had some physical condition that led to his distinctive nickname. That he was remembered as intelligent and ruthless. That his legacy, however distorted by time, endured for more than 1,000 years. The rest, the psychological complexity, the family dynamics, the internal struggles and external triumphs, could only be imagined. Historians could make educated guesses based on the culture of the time, the patterns of human behavior, the logic of political and military strategy. But the inner life of Ivar the Boneless remained, and would always remain, a matter of speculation. Perhaps that was appropriate. Perhaps the gap between the historical figure and the legendary one was itself meaningful. Ivar had spent his life trying to control how people perceived him, trying to prove that he was more than his disability, trying to force the world to see him as powerful despite, or because of, his broken body. In death, he lost that control. His story became whatever people needed it to be. He became a mirror in which each generation saw its own preoccupations reflected back. For the Vikings who immediately followed him, he was a reminder of what ambition and ruthlessness could achieve. For the Saxons he terrorized, he was a demon sent to test their faith. For medieval chroniclers, he was a colorful villain whose atrocities made for dramatic narrative. For modern audiences, he was a complex figure whose disability and genius raised questions about ability, determination, and the moral costs of success. The man himself, the actual Ivar, whoever he really was, would probably have hated all of this. He had wanted to be judged on his achievements, on the kingdoms he conquered, and the strategies he devised. Instead, he was judged on his disability, on the nickname that defined him, on the very thing he had spent his life trying to transcend. Or perhaps he would have appreciated the irony. Perhaps in whatever afterlife he imagined, he looked back at his legend with that same hollow laugh that had characterized his final years. Perhaps he understood in the end that trying to control how you are remembered is as futile as trying to control whether you can walk. History does what it wants with the dead. Memory is not subject to strategy or will. What remains more than 1,100 years after his death is the echo. The story of a man born into circumstances that should have destroyed him, who instead became one of the most consequential figures of his age. A man who proved that physical limitation was no barrier to military success, but who also demonstrated that success without humanity was hollow. A man who conquered kingdoms, but could not conquer his own fear. A man who laughed at death because he had already lost everything that made life worth living. Ivar, the Boneless, monster, genius, conqueror, victim, symbol. Whatever else he was unforgettable. His bones, wherever they lie, have long since turned to dust, but his name endures. His story is still told, and in the telling and retelling, across centuries and cultures, through facts and fictions, the crippled son of Ragnar Lodbrok achieved a kind of immortality, not the immortality he wanted, glory without qualification, respect without reservation, but perhaps the only immortality available to any of us, to be remembered, to be discussed, to be argued about, to mean something to people we will never meet in times we cannot imagine. The man who could not walk has walked through history for more than a millennium, And he will walk for centuries more, carried not by his legs but by the enduring human fascination with those who overcome impossible odds, who achieve greatness despite or because of their suffering, who prove that strength comes in forms we do not always recognize. Ivar the Boneless, the legend, the mystery, the eternal echo of a life lived in defiance of every limitation except the ones he imposed on himself.